I remember the exact second the galaxy decided we were too dangerous to belong. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no loud voices, no raised fists, no long speeches filled with fire. It was quiet. That was the worst part. 11 civilizations, each one older than human writing, each one sitting behind polished stone panels in the grand conclave chamber on Arcturus Station, and every single one of them pressing a small glowing button that said no. Not to a proposal, not to a trade agreement, to us, to Earth, to every human being who had ever looked up at the night sky and dared to think they had a right to go there. I was standing at the speaker's podium when it happened. My name is Cale Morrow. At that time I was 54 years old, the Earth representative to the Galactic Council, and I had been in that chamber more times than I could count. I had debated trade lane access. I had argued over colony registration forms. I had sat through 14-hour sessions about atmospheric labeling requirements for food exports. I had done all of it with patience, because that was what the job required. But nothing in 40 years of diplomacy had prepared me for the moment. Curator Thessel, of the Veth Nation, stood up, adjusted the silver band across his long gray chest, and said the words I had been dreading for 3 years. The Council moves to finalize the motion. Earth's seat is hereby suspended pending civilizational review. The translator in my earpiece delivered it in the same flat tone it used for everything. Budget reports, trade disputes, death sentences, all the same voice. I had known this was coming. Our intelligence officers had told me 2 weeks before. The vote had been organized quietly, without public announcement, without giving Earth time to build opposition. That was how the Council worked when it wanted something done cleanly. They did not argue. They arranged. I looked around the chamber. 12 curved rows of seats, each row belonging to a different civilization. The Veth sat at the center, as always. Tall, thin, gray-skinned, with eyes that never blinked, and voices like wind, moving through dry grass. They were the oldest of the 12. They had been in space before humans had learned to write. That age gave them something. Not wisdom, I had decided long ago. Weight. The weight of time, which they used the same way some people use rank, to end conversations before they started. To my left sat the Krell, amphibious and wide, their translucent membranes catching the light every time they shifted. To my right, the Solvari, tall and copper-skinned, their forearms folded in the posture that meant they had already made their decision and were simply waiting for the ceremony to finish. Behind me sat observers from 7 associate civilizations, none of them with a vote, all of them watching, like people watching something burn from a safe distance. And then there was the Drenari representative, Counselor Evan, sitting in the far left corner, small and still, their compound eyes aimed directly at me. The Drenari were insectoid, barely 4 feet tall, and they had joined the Council only 60 years ago. They were the youngest member, which meant the other 11 treated them the way powerful people always treat newcomers, politely, completely, and without ever really listening. I had one ally in that room. One. Curator Thessel began reading the formal charges. That is what they called them. Charges, as though Earth were a suspect in a case that had been decided before the trial began. The first charge was unauthorized territorial expansion. Humanity had planted colonies on 4 worlds without submitting the required pre-approval forms to the Council's Colonial Registration Office. What the charge did not mention was that the forms had been deliberately delayed at the processing stage for 6 years by a Veth-controlled administrative body, and that 3 of those 4 worlds had been flagged as uninhabitable by Council surveys conducted 2 decades earlier. We had made them habitable. That seemed to frighten them more than the paperwork. The second charge was failure to comply with Biological Limitation Protocol 7. I had heard this one before. Protocol 7 required any species classified as a Category 3 expander, which humans had been since our 2nd decade of Council membership, to limit population growth to no more than 1.2% per year, and to submit quarterly demographic reports to the Population Oversight Committee. The charge was accurate. We had ignored the protocol. What the Council did not say out loud, though every diplomat in that room knew it, was that Protocol 7 had never been applied to any other species. It had been written specifically for us. The third charge was what they called aggressive posturing. Specifically, the incident 6 months earlier, when a Council enforcement drone had attempted to redirect a human freighter carrying medical supplies to a colony that had been hit by a dust storm. Our freighter captain, a woman named Donna Birch, had locked her ship's exterior cameras on the drone and broadcast the entire encounter live to every human news network she could reach. The council called this provocation. Donna Birch had called it journalism. I listened to all three charges without moving. I had learned a long time ago that the council read your face the way some people read a map. Every expression was a signal. Every reaction was data. I had spent years making my face into something that gave them nothing. When Thessel finished speaking, the chamber opened for response. This was the part of the process that looked like fairness. I had 3 minutes. I walked to the speaker's position and looked out at all of them. I thought about saying something careful, something measured, something that might preserve a thread of relationship we could pull on later. I was a diplomat. That was what diplomats did. They preserved threads. But I looked at the Solvari, who would not meet my eyes. I looked at the Krell representative, Counselor Braun, who had shared dinner with me 4 times and was now studying the surface of his desk with great interest. I looked at Thessel, who was watching me with the patient expression of someone who has already won and is simply being polite about it. And I thought about Earth. Not the planet, not the government, the people, the engineers at the Jovian shipyards who worked double shifts because they believed in something, the doctors at the colony on Kepler's third moon, who had spent 4 years making a dead rock livable because someone had told them it could not be done. My daughter Saren, who had just turned 24 and was training as a navigator on a civilian survey vessel because she had spent her whole life watching her father fight for a place at a table that did not want us there and had decided she would rather go somewhere the table had not been built yet. I did not say something careful. I leaned into the microphone and said 7 words. Then we will build something you cannot exile. The silence that followed those 7 words was the loudest thing I had ever heard. 11 civilizations, thousands of years of accumulated history and power and certainty, and for exactly 4 seconds, none of them made a sound. Then the vote proceeded. 11 buttons, 11 quiet clicks, 11 glowing indicators turning from white to red. 1 green light, from the far left corner, Evan of the Drenari, sitting straight, compound eyes still aimed at me, the only one in that chamber who voted to let us stay. Curator Thessel read the result as though announcing a weather report. Earth's seat on the Galactic Council was suspended indefinitely. All Council-registered trade routes to Sol System would be closed within 30 standard days. Human colony ships currently in transit were required to return to Sol space within 60 days. Any human vessel found beyond the Sol boundary after that period would be subject to enforcement action. That was how they said it. Enforcement action. Soft words for hard things. The Council was very good at that. I picked up the slim folder of documents I had brought with me, the ones full of counter-arguments and historical precedents, and carefully researched points that I had prepared over 3 weeks, and would never use now. I straightened my jacket. I walked back through the center of the chamber toward the exit, and I did not hurry, because I refused to let them have the satisfaction of watching me leave quickly. I was almost to the door, when I heard a sound behind me. Very quiet. The kind of sound a person makes when they move quickly and do not want to be noticed. I turned slightly and saw Evan, the Drenari counselor, standing 3 feet behind me. They had left their seat and crossed the chamber in the time it took me to walk 100 feet, and no one had stopped them because no one had been watching. Evan's mouth did not move in any visible way, but the small speaker on their collar produced a voice barely louder than breathing. "We will find you," Evan said, "when the time comes." I did not respond. I gave them nothing. Not a nod, not a blink. Because the chamber had eyes in every corner, and I would not give the Council a reason to punish the only friend we had left in that room. I walked out into the corridor, and the door sealed behind me, with a sound like the end of something. The walk from the chamber to the docking bay took 11 minutes. I counted them. The station was quiet at that hour, and the few staff members I passed in the corridors said nothing, which told me the word had already moved through the station's internal network faster than I had walked. That was how information traveled on Arcturus station, like water through cracks. By the time you heard the sound, everything was already wet. My aide, a young man named Cole Hartley, who had been with me for 3 years, and who had the particular skill of understanding when not to speak, fell into step beside me without a word. He handed me a glass of water. I drank it. We walked. The docking bay was large and mostly empty. Our diplomatic shuttle sat at the far end, small and civilian-looking next to the Veth patrol craft that occupied 3 of the other berths. As I crossed the floor, I looked up through the bay's observation panels at the stars outside. Space does not care about votes. That has always been one of the things I appreciate most about it. I was halfway across the bay when I stopped. Not because I heard anything, not because anything happened. I stopped because I realized, standing in that echoing, half-lit room with the stars visible through the panels above me, that something had shifted, not outside me, inside. Something that had been tightly wound for years, some compressed and careful version of myself that I had built to survive in rooms like the one I had just left, had quietly unclenched. We were out. There was nothing left to preserve, no relationship to protect, no seat to keep. The Council had removed every constraint it had placed on us by removing us from the system that generated them. I thought about what I had said. 7 words. I had not planned them. They had simply arrived, because they were true. Then we will build something you cannot exile. I had not known, standing at that podium, what exactly we would build. I had no plan, no blueprint, no timeline. I had nothing but the absolute certainty that a species which had survived ice ages and plagues and centuries of internal conflict and the long, difficult work of learning to reach for stars was not going to be stopped by a committee resolution on a space station 40 light-years from home. Behind me, at the edge of the bay, Cole spoke. "The shuttle is prepped. We can leave in 20 minutes. "Good," I said. I did not turn around. I kept looking at the stars. After a moment, Cole said quietly, "What do we tell Earth?" I thought about it for a few seconds. Then I said, "Tell them exactly what happened. All of it. Every word, every vote, every charge they read out. No softening, no diplomatic language. Tell them what it actually was." "And what was it, sir?" I finally looked away from the stars and turned toward the shuttle. "It was the last time," I said, "that we ever have to ask anyone for permission." We left Arcturus Station 40 minutes later. I sat at the small forward window of the shuttle as we moved away from the dock, and I watched the station shrink behind us. Its lights were still on. Its observation rings were still turning slowly. Everything about it looked exactly the same as it had when we arrived. That seemed wrong somehow. Places should look different after the things that happen inside them. I opened my personal log and recorded a single entry, not for the record, not for the historical archive, for myself. "Day 1, I said, "let's see what we can build." The stars did not answer, but they never do. That is the point of them. They are there regardless. They do not wait to be asked. They do not grant permission. They simply exist, in every direction, unlimited, patient, indifferent to the opinions of councils. We had a lot in common with them, I thought, more than I had realized. And we were going home. The shuttle entered the first hyperspace relay point 2 hours after leaving Arcturus Station. The familiar blue shimmer of transition light filled the cabin, and then it was gone, replaced by the ordinary black of open space. Normal travel, normal speed, normal rules. For now, Cole had fallen asleep in the rear seat with his jacket folded under his head. He was 27 years old, and had spent 3 years watching me negotiate in rooms where the air felt like it had been carefully arranged to make humans feel small. He was exhausted in the way that people get exhausted not from physical work, but from the constant effort of being in places where they are not wanted, and pretending not to notice. I did not sleep. I had not slept well on Arcturus Station for the last 2 years. I pulled out my personal device and opened the demographic files I kept as a habit. The ones that tracked the human populations across our solar system and the 4 colony worlds. 342 million people on Earth, 97 million on Mars, 41 million across the Jovian moon settlements, smaller numbers on the colony worlds, still growing, still building. Nearly 500 million human beings, whose future had just been decided by 11 committee votes, in a room they were not invited to. I looked at those numbers for a long time. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to feel the weight of them. Every single one of those people had a life. They woke up in the morning and made decisions, and worked at things, and cared about other people, and had opinions about food, and weather, and what direction their particular corner of the universe should go. Not one of them had been consulted today. Not one of them had been asked. 11 alien counselors who had never set foot on a human world had decided what those 500 million lives would and would not be allowed to do, and they had done it with quiet efficiency and the smooth confidence of people who had been making that kind of decision for so long that they had forgotten it was possible to question the right. My personal device buzzed, a message from Earth's Secretary of State, Owen Dale, who had been waiting for the outcome with a team of advisors in a room in Geneva. The message was 3 words. What do we do? I sat with that question for a while. Outside the window, stars moved past in the slow drift of regular flight speed. Somewhere behind me, Cole breathed quietly in his sleep. What do we do? We do not panic, I thought. That was the first thing. Panic was what the Council expected. They had been watching human civilization long enough to know that when humans were frightened, they argued with each other, blamed each other, split into camps, made noise. The Council had made the calculation that exile would generate enough internal conflict to keep us busy for a generation. We do not beg. That was the second thing. There would be people, good people, sensible people, who would immediately begin drafting appeal letters and proposing compromise frameworks and suggesting that we could meet some version of Protocol 7 if we negotiated the specific terms. Those people meant well. Those people were wrong. You do not negotiate with someone who has just told you that you do not deserve a seat at their table. You build your own table. I typed back to Owen Dale. My response was longer than 3 words, but not by much. We build. I will explain when I land. Tell no one we are already planning. Let them think we are regrouping. We have about 6 months before they realize we are not grieving, and we need to use every day of it. Owen replied in under a minute. Understood. Your office is waiting. I put the device away and looked out the window again. The relay system the shuttle was using was a Council-built network. Council-maintained. Council-controlled. Every ship that used it paid a usage fee to the Council's infrastructure fund, and every ship that used it could be tracked, rerouted, or stopped by a Council enforcement code. I had used this network for 40 years because it was the only option available. I thought about that, the monopoly on movement. The Council had not built the network as an act of generosity. They had built it as a leash, a very long, very comfortable leash, but a leash nonetheless. You could go where the leash let you go, and you paid for the privilege, and you called it access, and you called it membership, and you told yourself it was a partnership. It was not a partnership. I thought about Yara Osei. She was 41 years old, the lead propulsion physicist at the Jupiter Research Collective, and she had been trying to get her fold space research funded through official Council science channels for 9 years. 9 years of grant applications, review committees, polite rejections, and the specific kind of quiet contempt that institutions show to ideas they find threatening. The Council's Science Committee had rejected her final application 14 months ago, with a note that said her theoretical models fell outside accepted propulsion parameters. Accepted, as though someone had accepted the universe's parameters on behalf of everyone else and filed them away. Yara had sent me a message after that rejection. It was 1 sentence. I assume you already know they were not actually evaluating the science. I had known. The fold space principle she had been working on would, if it functioned the way her models predicted, allow a ship to move from one point in space to another without using the relay network at all, without Council infrastructure, without Council fees, without Council permission. It would make the leash irrelevant. Of course they had rejected it. I had told Yara to keep working. I had told her to do it quietly, without grants, without official channels, using whatever university equipment she could access through her regular research budget. I had told her that we might need it someday. I thought we were going to need it very soon. The shuttle crossed the halfway point between Arcturus Station and the Sol boundary. Through the window, the particular cluster of stars that marked the direction of home had shifted to almost directly ahead. I knew those patterns the way people who grow up near water know the shapes of coastlines. When I was a child in Cardiff, my father had taught me the constellations from the back garden on clear nights, standing in the cold with his finger pointing at specific lights and telling me their names. He had not lived to see me go to space, but I thought about him sometimes in these moments. I thought about what he would have thought of all this. He would have been furious about the vote. And then he would have said, "Right then, what are we doing about it?" That was the Welsh of him. That was the human of him. The absolute refusal to accept that a situation was simply bad without asking what came next. I opened a new file on my device and started writing. Not a speech, not a policy document. A list. It was not a particularly organized list. It was the kind that starts as a thought and becomes a plan only later, when you look back and realize that what seemed like randomness was actually your mind sorting through a problem it had been working on longer than you knew. Fold space research. Funding immediate, unofficial. Yara Osei. Shipyard capacity. Jupiter facilities. Convert from colony class to new category. Population protocols. Ignore. Full stop. No more reports to oversight committee. Trade routes. Find alternatives. Non-council species. Private channels. The Drenari. Evan. We will find you when the time comes. What did they know that they could not say in a council chamber? I wrote for a long time. The shuttle moved through space at the only speed the council's relay network allowed, comfortable and monitored and controlled, and I wrote down the bones of something that did not have a name yet. When Cole woke up 2 hours later, I handed him the list. He read it slowly. Then he looked up at me. This is not a recovery plan, he said. No, I agreed. He looked at the list again. This is a completely different thing. Yes. He handed it back to me. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I went into diplomatic service because I believed in the council system. I believed it was the right structure for managing galactic civilization. I know, I said. I am not sure I believe that anymore. I know that too. He nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they are not agreeing with someone else, but with a decision they have just made inside themselves. What do you need me to do? I looked at the list. Everything, I said, starting the moment we land. The soul boundary came into view 4 hours later. The relay network's final checkpoint beacon floated there in the dark, a small blinking light that marked the edge of the zone the council had just told us we could not leave. On this side, home. On the other side, a galaxy that had just closed its door. I looked at that blinking beacon for a long time as we passed it. Soon, I thought. Soon that door will not be the only way in. We came home to Earth in the early morning light of the northern hemisphere, and as the shuttle descended through the atmosphere, I looked out at the planet below, blue and white, and impossibly familiar, after years of alien stations and alien air, and alien silence, about the things that actually mattered. We had work to do. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Nobody told the people at the Jovian shipyards what they were building. That was deliberate. I had learned from 40 years of watching the council operate that the most dangerous moment in any plan is not the execution, but the announcement. The moment you name a thing, it becomes real to people who want to stop it. As long as it was just engineers working longer hours on vaguely described upgrades, it was invisible. And invisible was exactly what we needed to be. Owen Dale met me at the landing platform in Geneva, 4 hours after the shuttle touched down. He was a thin man with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that gives nothing away, which was why I had worked with him for 6 years. He shook my hand, said nothing, and handed me a coffee. We walked inside together, and he waited until the door was closed before he spoke. The council's trade closure notice arrived 40 minutes ago, he said. Standard format. 30 days before the trade lanes shut down. We have been asked to acknowledge receipt. Acknowledge it, I said, politely. No commentary. Already done. He sat down across from me at the small table in the interior office. No windows. I had asked for a room with no windows when I first came to this posting, not because I was afraid, but because windows give observers angles. The media is requesting statements. Every major network on Earth has been running the vote results for 3 hours. What is the tone? Divided, Owen said. About what you would expect. A third of the coverage is focused on what we did wrong and how we could have prevented this. A third is demanding we accept whatever terms the council sets. A third is saying we should stop asking for permission and do what we want. The last third, I said, is the one paying attention. He almost smiled. There are 6 council ambassadors currently on Earth who are requesting emergency meetings. The Krell and Solvari ambassadors specifically. Tell them my schedule is full for the next 3 weeks. Owen looked at me for a moment. That will be interpreted as a hostile signal. Good, I said. Let them interpret. While they are interpreting, I need 3 things. I need Yara Osei on a transport to Jupiter within 48 hours. No official paperwork. Listed as a research exchange visit. I need Cole Hartley transferred to a new role. Effective immediately. Director of Development. Sol Territories. That title does not exist yet. Create it. And I need an appointment with the Jupiter Facility Director, Nathan Graves, who does not know yet that the colony ships he has been building for the last 4 years are going to be converted into something else. Owen wrote none of this down. He was good that way. He looked at me with the calm expression of a man absorbing unusual instructions and filing them in the correct place internally. When do I tell Nathan Graves what they are being converted into? When we know exactly what that is, I said. Give me 2 weeks. I did not sleep for the first 36 hours, not because there was no time, but because every time I closed my eyes, the list from the shuttle expanded in my mind, pushing out in directions I had not yet mapped. There was too much to think about to waste it on unconsciousness. On the second day, I went to see Yara Osei at the research complex outside of Nairobi, where she had been working for the last 3 years. She met me at the building entrance, with a look that suggested she had been expecting someone like me to arrive for a while, and was mildly surprised it had taken this long. Yara was small and precise, with close-cut gray hair, and the kind of stillness that people develop when they have spent years working with equations that require complete focus. She had 3 advanced degrees, 2 of them from institutions the Galactic Council had ranked as, quote, insufficiently rigorous, in a review they had published 11 years ago. The institutions had been human-founded. The review had come out 18 months after Yara's Foldspace papers started circulating in the broader physics community. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from me at her desk, which was covered in printed equations, annotated with small, very precise handwriting. She did not ask how I was, or comment on the council vote, or say anything consoling. She said, "How much budget?" "Unlimited," I said. "Off the books. Whatever you need." She picked up her tea. "Timeline?" "As fast as you can work without destroying the quality." "Define fast." "Functional prototype in 2 years. Scaled engineering in 4. She was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain, because she was doing calculations. I had learned to recognize the specific quality of her silences. The prototype is achievable in 18 months if I have direct access to the Jupiter test facilities and 3 researchers of my specific choosing. "You have it," I said. "All of it." She nodded once and put her tea down. "I want it on record that I told the Council's Science Committee in my final rejected application that their alternative propulsion model was built on 3 flawed assumptions. It will be on record," I said. "I will personally make sure of that." For the first time since I had walked in, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. The satisfaction of someone who has been right for a very long time and is finally being told they can prove it. The 6 weeks after I returned from Arcturus Station were the strangest of my career. On the surface, everything at Earth's government level looked like grief and adjustment. Committees were formed to assess the economic impact of the trade lane closures. Subcommittees were formed to review our relationship with the Council. Public statements were issued that were carefully calibrated to sound cooperative without actually committing to anything. Owen Dale handled all of it with the precision of someone playing a very complicated instrument in front of an audience, while simultaneously building a second instrument behind a curtain. The Council's ambassadors on Earth sent messages. I responded to none of them personally. My office sent polite holding replies that said we were in a period of internal review and would be in touch. This was true, in a narrow technical sense. Meanwhile, the actual work began. Nathan Graves, the Jupiter Facility Director, was a large man with a quiet voice and the specific kind of pragmatic intelligence that makes a person excellent at running complex engineering operations in difficult environments. He had spent 20 years building ships in the outer system and had very little patience for things that wasted time. When I arrived at his office on Ganymede and explained what I needed, he did not ask me whether it was legal under Council regulations. He asked how many ships and what configuration. I liked him immediately. The colony vessels currently in construction at his facility were designed for slow, comfortable transit along Council-approved routes. Large hulls, generous living quarters, efficient but not fast propulsion. They were good ships for what they were designed to do, which was move people from one approved location to another approved location at an approved speed with an approved cargo manifest. We would not be needing approved. Nathan and I spent 4 days going through the technical specifications. The colony ship hulls were actually excellent starting points. Their structural frames were robust, their power plants were oversized relative to their current engines, and their cargo bays could be reconfigured. What they needed was new propulsion architecture, new weapons systems that did not yet exist, but that Nathan's engineers were already beginning to sketch out on the basis of theoretical papers they had been writing for years without expectation of application, and new shielding based on a metamaterial design that my daughter Saren had sent me from her own research 6 months ago, with a note that said she had developed it based on a council weapons study that had been in our classified archive for 12 years. Saren had found the study in the archive and spent 8 months quietly working on it in her off hours. She was a navigator on a civilian survey vessel and a materials scientist in the hours between shifts, and she had sent me her results the same way she had been sending me things since she was 12 years old, with the subject line, "Thought you might find this useful," and no further explanation. I had forwarded her results to Nathan on my second day at Ganymede. When he read them, he sat very still for about 90 seconds, and then looked up at me and said, in his quiet, even voice, "Your daughter designed this?" "Yes," I said. "How old is she?" 24. Nathan looked at the design specifications again for another moment. "We will need her here," he said. I sent Saren a message that evening. I told her she was being transferred from her survey vessel to the Jupiter facility, effective whenever she wanted, and that the transfer was permanent if she chose it. I told her she would be working on something large and that she would understand the scope when she arrived. Her reply came 6 hours later, in the middle of my sleep cycle. "I have been waiting," she said, "for you to finally ask." She arrived at Ganymede 12 days later with a travel bag, a tablet full of materials research, and the same expression she had worn at age 7 when she was about to do something she had been planning for a long time. She shook Nathan's hand, looked around the facility with the particular attention of someone memorizing a space they intend to fill, and then looked at me. "Show me what we are starting with," she said. I showed her. The months that followed were the quietest and most intense of my life. On the surface, at the diplomatic level, nothing seemed to be happening. Earth was processing its exile. Earth was mourning its council seat. Earth was slowly, carefully, very visibly doing nothing in particular. Below that surface, at Ganymede and in Yara's lab, and in 12 other locations across the solar system that were conducting research under project names that sounded aggressively boring, something was being built that the galaxy had not seen before. I visited each location regularly, not because I needed to check on the work. The people doing the work did not need checking. They needed resources, and they needed to know that what they were building mattered to someone with the authority to protect it. Those things I could provide. The Council's drones visited Sol Space twice in that period. Standard monitoring drones, the kind they sent to all their exiled or suspended member systems, checking for signs of what the official protocol called destabilizing activity. Both times, our system's tracking network identified them before they were close enough to observe anything detailed, and both times, they found exactly what we wanted them to find. Normal power signatures, normal ship movements, normal, quiet, orderly inactivity. Our engineers were very good at making extraordinary things look ordinary from a distance. Evan of the Drenari reached out 14 months after the vote, not through any official channel. Through a personal contact of mine, a cargo broker named Patrick Dunn, who ran a small independent trading operation that had never formally registered with the Council's Commerce Office, and who therefore did not appear in any system that the Council's Intelligence Division tracked. Patrick passed me a message that had been passed to him through a chain of 3 other intermediaries, each one chosen because they existed in the margins of the Council's information network. The message from Evan was a set of coordinates and a file attachment. The file attachment, when Yara opened it in her lab on Jupiter, made her stop completely for 11 seconds. I counted, because I was watching. Then she said, very quietly, "This is not theoretically possible." "And yet," I said. She looked at the file again. "This is a complete second-generation fold space drive schematic, not a prototype model, not a theoretical framework, a complete engineering schematic. Yes, the Drenari built this." "Apparently so." She looked at me. They have been building this for how long? I do not know, I said. But Evan told us they would find us when the time came. I think this is what they were waiting to give us. Yara turned back to the screen. She was quiet for a long moment, reading, absorbing, her mind doing the thing it did that was not something I could follow, but that I recognized by the quality of her stillness. Then she said, "This extends our range by a factor of 10. This is not an improvement on my design. This is a generation beyond it. How long to incorporate it into the prototype?" She thought about it. 6 months. Maybe less. Then we have 6 months, I said. Outside the window of Yara's lab, Jupiter turned slowly, its massive striped surface occupying half the visible sky. The facility's lights were on across every section, and through the structural glass I could see people moving, working, carrying things, adjusting instruments. 1,000 people who were building the future of human civilization in the dark, without an audience, without official approval, without a single report submitted to any oversight committee. They were extraordinary, every last one of them. I thought about the council chamber on Arcturus Station. I thought about Curator Thessel reading the charges in his flat, precise voice. I thought about the 11 red lights. I thought about Evan's green light, and Evan's quiet voice in the corridor after. "We will find you when the time comes." I stood at Yara's window and looked out at Jupiter and thought, yes, you did. And we were almost ready. The prototype tested for the first time on a Tuesday morning, which felt like the wrong day for history. History should happen on days with better weather, or at least on days that feel significant before they begin. Tuesday morning on Ganymede, with a gray sky through the observation panels and a half-finished cup of coffee on my console, felt like the start of an ordinary day in which nothing remarkable would occur. The ship was called the Pioneer, which was Nathan Graves's idea, and which I thought was a very appropriate name for something that was going to go somewhere no human-made vessel had gone before. It was not one of the converted colony ships. Those were still 3 months from completion. The Pioneer was a stripped-down test vessel, barely the size of a large transport, with most of its interior replaced by Yara's fold drive and the monitoring equipment we needed to measure what happened when it activated. There was no crew aboard. That had been a non-negotiable condition that I had imposed when Yara mentioned casually, 3 days before the test, that she was considering going along personally to observe the readings from inside. I had told her absolutely not. She had given me a look that suggested she found my concern touching but misguided. I had told her we would have a great deal of time to be brave later, and that right now I needed her expertise available to interpret results, not floating in space. She had stayed behind. But the look had not changed. At 9 minutes past 8 in the morning, the Pioneer's fold drive activated. For exactly 1.4 seconds, from the observation gallery where I was standing with Nathan and Cole and Saren and Yara and about 60 other people who had built or designed or tested some component of what was happening, the Pioneer disappeared. Not in a flash, not with a sound. It simply was there, and then it was not there. The displays went quiet for those 1.4 seconds. Then they filled with data. The Pioneer had translated, which was the word Yara used, 23 light minutes from Ganymede, in a region of open space that had been cleared of all traffic as a precaution. 23 light minutes, in 1.4 seconds. The Council's fastest enforcement ship covered that distance in 9 hours. Nobody in the observation gallery made a sound for a moment, after the data resolved on the displays. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. And then it was everyone, all 60 people in that gallery, and the sound of it filled the room and bounced off the walls, and I stood in the middle of it and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph, not vindication, though both of those were present. Relief. The deep, physical relief of a gamble paying out, of a thing you believed in being proven real. Saren was standing next to me, and she looked at the display for a moment, and then she looked at me, and she said, quietly enough that only I could hear her under the noise, "Dad, we actually did it." "Yes," I said. "We did. What happens now?" I looked at the data on the display. The Pioneer was already on its return translation. 23 light minutes back to Ganymede. Arriving in, the display said, 1.6 seconds. "Now," I said, "we scale." Scaling took 8 more months. 8 months of 3-shift days at the facility, of engineers sleeping in their offices and researchers running tests, and Nathan Graves walking the floor of every section every single morning with a cup of coffee, and the specific expression of a man who is holding something enormous together through sheer organizational will. 8 months of Saren redesigning her metamaterial plating to integrate with the fold drive's energy signature, and of Yara refining the translation equations until the margin of error on a fold jump dropped from 1,200 meters to 40. 8 months in which the Council sent 6 more drones to Sol space, each one finding nothing unusual, and in which 3 more alien civilizations quietly contacted our diplomatic office through informal channels to ask about Earth's situation and what our plans were. We told all 3 the same thing. We were in a period of reassessment. We would be in touch. None of us knew yet exactly how in touch we were going to be. The 6 converted colony ships finished their refit 14 months after the original test. They were not colony ships anymore in any meaningful sense. They were something the galaxy had not seen yet. They were fast and they could fold. They had weapon systems that Saren's plating made significantly more effective than their technical specifications suggested. They were crewed by people who had been training for this specific kind of ship for a year, and who were, without exception, the kind of people who had applied for positions on experimental vessels in the first place, which meant they were exactly the kind of people who had decided, at some point in their lives, that predictable destinations held very little appeal. The first of the 6 was completed on a Friday afternoon in October. Nathan walked the full length of it from bow to stern with me, before the crew boarded, and when we reached the forward observation section at the front of the ship, he stopped and looked out at the space beyond the dock. "I built colony ships for 20 years, he said. "I know," I said. "Good ships, solid ships, ships that did exactly what they were supposed to do. They were excellent ships." He was quiet for a moment. "This is a different kind of ship." "Yes," I said. "This ship does not ask where it is allowed to go." "No," I said. "It does not." Nathan looked at the space outside the dock for another moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the entrance. "The crew boards in 3 hours," he said. "Departure at dawn." I stood there for another minute after he left, looking at the hull. My daughter's material science was in that hull. Yara's equations were in the drive. Nathan's engineering was in every joint and panel. Patrick Dunn's quiet network had moved supplies and personnel and information without leaving a visible trace in any council-monitored system. All of these people, all of this work, for a thing that had not existed and now did. We had 4 months before the council realized something had changed. I intended to use every one of them. The blockade line was a thin thing when you saw it up close. That surprised me. I had spent 5 years thinking about it the way you think about any enforced boundary, as something real and physical and present. But when the ship came out of its approach vector at the edge of Sol space, all that was actually there was empty vacuum and a set of drones blinking in the dark. Small drones, 12 of them, arranged in a loose perimeter arc, each one broadcasting the Council's standard enforcement signal on a frequency that every human vessel's navigation system had been configured to recognize and respect for the last 5 years. I was 29 years old and I was sitting in the command chair of a ship with no name that the Council did not know existed, and I was looking at those drones through the forward view panel, and I was thinking about what my father had said when I asked him, 2 months before this day, what it would feel like to cross a line that someone else had drawn in space and told you not to cross. He had thought about it for a long time. Then he had said, "I imagine it feels like the truth arriving. My name is Saren Morrow. I had been waiting for this for a long time." The ship was not officially commissioned yet. That was a detail that would be handled later. What mattered right now was that it flew, that its fold drive was fully operational, and had been tested across 31 translation sequences over the past 6 weeks, and that its crew of 43 people had spent the last 3 months training specifically for this moment, not training to cross the line, training for everything that might happen after. 43 people. Navigator First Class Lena Park, who had memorized the fold equations so thoroughly she could run manual calculations in her head faster than most computer systems could run them automatically. Engineer Chief Barry Cole, who had been at the Jupiter facility for 9 years and who had told me on his first day of refit work that he planned to be on whatever ship left first. Tactical Officer Derek Vane, who had worked in Council enforcement monitoring for 6 years before the vote, and who understood how their response systems worked. because he had spent years watching them operate. And 20 others whose names I knew as well as my own by now, because people who are going to cross a line together in the dark of space should know each other's names. I opened a channel to the 12 drones. "This is the Sol vessel Pioneer 2, I said, which was the name we had given it for this day, and which I had chosen specifically because the first Pioneer had gone somewhere no human ship had gone before. "We are crossing the boundary." The drones responded immediately with the standard enforcement broadcast. "Halt. Return to Sol space. Unauthorized transit will be met with enforcement action." The voice was automated, the same flat tone the Council used for everything. It gave the message 3 times, as protocol required. Then it gave it a 4th time. I waited. "Recording complete," Lena said from the navigation station. She had been monitoring the drone transmissions for the last 4 minutes, capturing every frequency and timestamp. The record was important, not for legal purposes, for history. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small data chip. My father had given it to me 10 days ago. He had told me what was on it and said he thought this was the right moment for it. I slotted it into the ship's broadcast system and pressed play. What came out of the speakers was the audio from the Galactic Council chamber on Arcturus Station, 5 years ago. The charges being read, the vote being announced. 11 clicks, 1 green light, and then, afterward, my father's voice. Quiet, not shouting. 7 words. "Then we will build something you cannot exile." I let it play twice. Then I said, "Fold drive, activate. Target coordinates confirmed." What happened next took less than 2 seconds. One moment we were at the Sol boundary, 12 drones surrounding us with their blinking enforcement signals. The next moment, we were 43 light-years away, in open, unclaimed space that the Council had marked as reserved for future allocation in a document filed 800 years ago and never revisited. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. Then Barry Cole's voice came from engineering. Translation nominal. All systems reading green. Fold integrity confirmed. Then Lena, at navigation. Position confirmed. "We are 43 light-years from Sol. 218 light-years from Arcturus Station." Then Derek, at tactical, with the specific understatement of someone who is very composed when things are happening and very funny about it afterward. "Drones do not appear to have followed us." I turned around in my chair and looked at the crew. Every face in that room was looking back at me. 43 people, in a ship that had just gone somewhere no human-registered vessel had ever gone, in a space that no one had told us we were allowed to occupy, aboard a ship that the Council did not have on any list. "We made it," I said. "Now let us see what we actually came to do." The fold jump had brought us out inside a system with a single star and 7 planets. Yara's targeting equations had dropped us into the outer system, with enough margin to orient, before doing anything else. The 3rd planet was reading atmosphere in the preliminary scans. Not breathable, but atmospheric. That was more than most rocks in unclaimed space offered. We were not here for colonization, not yet. What we were here for was a signal. We had identified this system from Council survey data 18 months ago. The survey had noted it as unoccupied and of limited resource value, and had filed it under low priority review, which in Council administrative terms meant it would be assessed sometime in the next 2 to 5 centuries when they got around to it. What the survey had also noted, in a footnote that had been appended by a junior survey officer and then never followed up, was an intermittent electromagnetic pattern originating from the 2nd planet that did not match any known geological or stellar source. We had a word for that kind of pattern: signal. Derek had been working with Lena on the translation for 6 weeks before we left. The pattern was not complex in the way that advanced communication is complex. It was repetitive, rhythmic, built on base mathematics. The way a civilization that is not yet in space announces itself to space. The way a species that has not yet learned that anyone might be listening still reaches out anyway, because something in them needs to. The 2nd planet was 5 light minutes from our position. We moved toward it at subfold speed, watching the signal get clearer on the instruments as we closed the distance. "It is biological," Derek said, after 20 minutes of watching the data. "The signal is not artificial in the mechanical sense. It is structured. Something is making it. But it is not coming from a machine." Lena looked up from her station. It is coming from organisms. A lot of organisms, Derek confirmed. The pattern is too complex and too varied to be a single source. There are multiple emitters, coordinated, like a chorus. Acoustic or electromagnetic? I asked. Both. The primary signal is acoustic, generated at a frequency we cannot hear. The electromagnetic component is a byproduct of the biological process, not intentional broadcasting. They do not know they are transmitting into space. I thought about that for a moment. A species that was communicating across distance, probably large distance, without knowing they were doing it on frequencies that could travel beyond their atmosphere. How developed? I asked. Derek consulted his instruments. No artificial structures visible from orbit. No evidence of industrial activity. No light pollution on the night side. We are looking at a pre-technological civilization, possibly equivalent to Earth, 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. Are they aware of us? I asked. We are 40,000 kilometers from their atmosphere, Lena said. They do not have the technology to detect us. The second planet filled more of the forward view as we got closer. It was greener than Earth, with wide, shallow oceans and dense vegetation visible, even from high orbit. The signal was clear now, a layered pattern of sound, encoded in electromagnetic waves. Dozens of distinct voices, or voices that were not voices, overlapping and responding to each other in a structure that was clearly organized and clearly communicative. The Council would have classified this world under Category 4, Observed Developing, and placed it on the Protected Observation List, which would have meant no contact, no communication, and a perimeter zone of 2 light-years that no registered vessel was permitted to enter without an approved research license that took 8 to 12 years to process. I thought about that. I thought about what it meant to decide that an entire civilization was too young to be spoken to, and to make that decision for them, without asking them. I asked Lena to open a communication channel on the frequency of their primary signal. She looked at me for a moment, not questioning the order, assessing the implications of it. Lena Park had been assessing implications since I had known her, and it was one of the things I appreciated most about her. The Council Protocol for Pre-Contact Civilizations prohibits communication without a first contact license, she said. Not because I am pointing that out as an objection. I want to make sure you know I am aware of it. I am aware of it, I said. Open the channel. She opened it. What I said into that channel was not a speech. It was not a greeting prepared by a committee. It was not a formal declaration of contact. I said something simple, built on base mathematics and rhythm, patterned after the structure of their own signal. I said, in the only universal language that works across complete ignorance of each other, we hear you. We do not know if they heard us. We do not know if what we sent reached them in a form they could understand. The science of communication across that kind of divide is not a matter of weeks or months, but we sent it. We reached out in the same direction they were reaching, and we said, you are not alone in this, and whatever happens next, that moment happened. I recorded it in the ship's log with the timestamp and the coordinates. Then Derek spoke. I am reading an emergency signal, he said. 11 light minutes from our current position. Encrypted. The encryption pattern is Drenari. I turned around fast. Put it on. The signal was audio, transmitted in the tight beam format the Drenari used for urgent communication. A voice I recognized. Counselor Evan, though the voice was stripped of its usual deliberate calm, moving with an urgency that made the translator work harder than usual to keep up. Soul Vessel, Evan said. If you are who I believe you are, I need you to listen very quickly. I am transmitting on my personal emergency beacon because my ship's primary systems are compromised. We were intercepted by 3 Council enforcement craft 40 minutes ago on a routine transit. They claim we have violated Interspecies Commerce Statute 14 by conducting undocumented communications with restricted parties. They are holding my crew and preparing to escort us to Veth space for processing, which in standard terms means we will not be released for 6 months minimum and possibly never. A pause in the transmission. Then, I voted for you 5 years ago. I gave you what I had, because I believed you would build something the galaxy needed. If you are out here, it means you are already building it. I am asking you now to help me the way I helped you. Silence. I looked at Derek. Distance? 11 light minutes, he said. 22 minutes at our best subfold speed. He paused. 40 seconds with the fold drive. I looked at Lena. She was already running calculations. I looked at Derek. What are we looking at when we get there? 3 Council enforcement vessels based on signal strength, he said. Krell-class interceptors. Smaller than us. Faster than a standard human ship. But we are not a standard human ship. They have active weapons systems. Do they know about our fold drive? No, Derek said. Nobody knows about our fold drive except us. I stood up from the command chair. 43 people watching me. 43 people who had crossed a forbidden line an hour ago because I had asked them to, and who were now waiting to find out whether the line we were about to cross was even further. There was no council authorization for what I was about to do. There was no diplomatic clearance. There was no approved protocol. There was, in fact, a significant argument to be made that intervening in an active council enforcement action against a council member species would be considered, under current galactic law, an act of open hostility. I had thought about what my father would say in this moment. Then I had decided not to think about what my father would say, because my father was not here, and I was the one in the chair. Evan had voted for us when 11 others had not. Evan had given us coordinates, and a schematic, and a message through 3 intermediaries, when they could have said nothing and stayed safe. Evan had helped us in the dark, at personal risk, because they believed in something. The only answer to that was the same answer back. Fold drive, I said. Target Drenari signal. Activate. The second translation of our first day outside Sol space took us 43 seconds, accounting for targeting refinement. When we arrived, 3 council enforcement vessels were in a holding position around a small Drenari ship that was broadcasting a compliance signal on its primary channel because its crew had been instructed to cooperate. We came out of the fold 11 kilometers from the nearest enforcement ship, which was close enough that it took them 4 seconds to resolve us on their instruments. 4 seconds was enough time for Derek to have every one of our weapons systems active and targeted. It was enough time for Lena to establish a direct communication link with the Drenari vessel. And it was enough time for me to open a channel to all 3 enforcement ships simultaneously. This is the Sol Vessel Pioneer 2, I said. The Drenari ship is under our protection. Release them now and stand down your weapons systems. The enforcement ships did not respond immediately. But they also did not fire. In the silence that followed, I thought about the fact that they had never seen a human ship appear out of empty space with no warning. No approach vector. No transit signature. Nothing on any instrument until we were just there, armed and close and completely serious about what we were saying. The middle enforcement ship opened a channel. Its commander's voice came through the translator, with the particular cadence of someone who is angry and hiding it very poorly. Sol vessel, you have no jurisdiction in this sector. You are in violation of council boundary enforcement, and you are interfering in an active compliance action. Stand down, or you will be detained. I said, I will count to 30. I counted to 30. On 28, the 3 enforcement ships changed their positioning. I watched them do it on the tactical display, moving apart, creating separation, preparing to engage from 3 different angles. On 29, Derek said, they are going to fire on 30. On 30, I said, all right, and I gave Derek the targeting authorization he had been waiting for, and what happened next took 6 minutes and changed the history of the galaxy. But at that exact moment, I was only thinking about one thing. Evan had said, if you are out here, it means you are already building it. We were, and it was working exactly as planned. 6 minutes was enough time for 3 council enforcement ships to discover several things they had not known before. They did not know that our hull plating absorbed their standard weapons discharge at 67% efficiency, which meant that the 2 volleys they managed to fire before Derek returned fire landed with the impact of a hard shove rather than a serious strike. They did not know that our weapon systems had been designed by engineers who had been studying council ship architecture for 40 years and who had built our targeting around the specific blind spots in Krell-class interceptor shielding. There were 3 blind spots, 1 in the rear drive section, 1 along the port sensor array, 1 at the base of the forward weapons assembly. Derek hit all 3 on all 3 ships in the first 30 seconds. After that, the fight was not really a fight in the traditional sense. It was more of a demonstration. The enforcement ships were not destroyed. They were disabled. Their propulsion systems were offline. Their weapons were offline. Their communications were functioning perfectly. Because we had specifically avoided their communications arrays, because it was important to us that they be able to tell people what had just happened. The crew of the Drenari ship had been moved to a secured area of their vessel when the enforcement action began. Standard procedure, during a council detention. When Lena opened the communication line, it was Evan who answered. Their voice was so controlled it took me a moment to hear the relief underneath it. "Sol vessel," Evan said. "I did not actually expect this to work." "Neither did I completely," I said, which was honest. "Are your crew safe?" "Yes. The enforcement officers did not harm anyone. They were simply very certain of their authority." "They are a little less certain now," Derek said, from tactical, and I heard two of my other crew members make a sound that was not quite laughter, but was in the same direction. "Can you make fold-speed transit?" I asked Evan. "Our drive is operational." We were not disabled, only held. "Then I am going to give you a set of coordinates," I said. "They are in unclaimed space that we have just visited. We would very much like to have a conversation with you that is not on any monitored channel. Can you meet us there?" A pause. "Yes," Evan said. "Saren Morrow, your father said you would be the one to cross first." He said that. He said the people who build things are important, but the people willing to cross lines are the ones who make the building matter. Another pause. He was right. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "We will see you at the coordinates in 6 hours." We translated back to the unclaimed system, while the enforcement ships were still working out how to communicate their situation, without sounding as though what had happened was their fault. That would take them a while. Explaining to your superiors that a human vessel you had never seen before appeared from nowhere, disabled your weapons, freed your detainee, and left, was the kind of report that required multiple drafts. The Drenari ship arrived at our coordinates 4 hours and 40 minutes later. Evan came aboard with 2 of their crew, moving through our corridors with the careful attention of someone memorizing a new environment. They were small, as all Drenari were, and the ship's corridors were built for human proportions, but they moved through it without comment. Evan sat across from me in the ship's briefing room. Their compound eyes caught the light at different angles as they looked around at the room, at the crew members who had come in to hear this conversation, at me. "We have been building toward this for 30 years, Evan said. "Not we, the Drenari government. We, a specific group within the Drenari diplomatic service who believed that the council was not going to change from inside, that the only way the council's authority over smaller civilizations would ever be challenged was if a species large enough and capable enough decided to challenge it. You chose us," I said. "We identified you," Evan said. "The choosing was yours. You were the only species in the council's membership that consistently refused to accept the premise of your own limitations. Every other species, when told they were too young or too small or too aggressive, adjusted, tried harder, became more compliant. You argued. You pushed back. You found the exact specific edges of every rule and tested them." "That sounds like a description of a problem," said Derek, from the corner of the room. "To the council, yes," Evan said. "To us, it was a description of the only species likely to actually do something about the problem." Evan looked at me again. "The schematics I sent you, have they been useful?" "We are sitting in a ship 43 light-years from Sol," I said. "So yes." Evan made a sound that the translator did not render as any specific word, something that might have been satisfaction. "There are 6 other civilizations in similar positions to ours, not as small as the Drenari, but not large enough to challenge the council alone. We have been in contact with them, carefully, for many years. They are watching what you are doing. They are deciding whether to step forward." "What would make them step forward?" I asked. "An invitation from a power large enough to protect them, if the council retaliates," Evan said, "and evidence that the power making the invitation actually means what it says." I thought about that. Then I thought about something my father had said to me when I was 15, which was that the most important thing a person or a nation could do was mean exactly what they said and say exactly what they meant, because in the long run, the universe was very good at identifying the difference. "Tell them," I said, "that the invitation is open. Tell them what you saw today. Tell them we crossed the line they told us not to cross, and we went further than they expected. And when one of our friends needed help, we came without being asked to come, and without stopping to calculate whether it was politically convenient." Evan was quiet for a moment. Then they said, I will tell them. Outside the ship, the second planet's signal was still transmitting. The chorus of organisms on a world that did not know we were there, reaching outward in the only way they knew. I thought about what we had sent down to them earlier. We hear you. I thought about what Evan had just said, an invitation from a power large enough to protect them. 5 years ago, my father had stood at a podium and said we would build something the council could not exile. At the time, he had not known what that thing was. It had been a promise made in a moment of clarity, the way the truest promises always are, before the details arrived. The details were arriving now. I looked at Evan. We are not done building, I said, not even close. But the foundation is solid. Evan's compound eyes reflected the light from a star 43 light-years from everything I had grown up calling home. Yes, Evan said, I can see that. The council called what Saren did an act of aggression. I called it a Tuesday. The broadcast reached Earth 6 days after the incident, not a news report. A formal diplomatic communique from Curator Thessel of the Veth Nation, addressed directly to me, delivered on every official channel the council still had connected to Sol Space, which was not many, but which still included our emergency frequencies. Thessel's face on my office screen had the expression of someone who has just stepped on something in the dark and has not yet decided whether to be angry or frightened. He said that a human vessel had attacked 3 council enforcement ships without provocation. He said this was a declaration of hostile intent. He said that Earth had 20 standard days to recall all vessels from outside Sol Space, submit a formal apology, and agree to a security review under council supervision. He said that failure to comply would result in consequences. I watched the whole message twice. The second time I watched it, I was paying attention to the edges of his expression, the particular tension around his eyes, the slight adjustments in his posture that Veth made when they were under pressure they were not used to. I had spent 40 years watching Veth diplomats in environments they controlled completely, and I knew what their confidence looked like. This was not that. This was someone who had received a report from 3 enforcement ship commanders and had spent several very uncomfortable hours understanding what it meant. Owen Dale was sitting across from me when the message finished. He had brought tea, which he set on the desk without asking if I wanted any. I picked it up and drank it, because it was something to do with my hands while I thought. 20 days, Owen said. Yes. To recall, apologize, and submit to review. That is what he said. Owen was quiet for a moment. He had the expression he got when he was working through a situation from multiple angles, before settling on the most useful one. What do we actually want to happen in 20 days? That was Owen's particular gift. He did not ask what we were going to do, which was a smaller question. He asked what we wanted to happen, which was the question that contained all the others. I had been thinking about this since Saren's report came in. She had sent me a full transcript of the incident within 48 hours, along with her log entries and Derek Vane's tactical record and Lena Park's navigation data. I had read everything twice. What I had read was not an act of aggression. What I had read was a demonstration, entirely by accident, because Saren had not gone out there to demonstrate anything. She had gone out there to cross a line and make first contact and see what the universe looked like from the other side. And then someone she cared about had needed help, and she had helped them, and in doing so she had shown 3 council enforcement vessels, and through their report, the entire council intelligence division, something they had not known and could not forget. That we were different from what they thought we were. The council's entire management of humanity for the last 40 years had been built on a model. The model said that humans were capable, adaptable, and stubborn, but that they were ultimately constrained by the same things that constrained every other species. They needed resources. They needed trade. They needed the infrastructure of an interconnected galactic civilization to function at the level they aspired to. Cut them off from that infrastructure, and they would either collapse or comply. The model was wrong. It had been wrong for 5 years, and the council had not known it, because we had been very careful to let them not know it. Now they knew. Not everything, not the full scope of what we had built in the silence years, but enough to generate genuine uncertainty, which in a civilization that had operated from certainty for 11,000 years was almost as disruptive as fear. I typed my response to Curator Thessel personally. I did not use diplomatic language. I did not use the careful, softened vocabulary of someone who is trying to preserve a relationship. I used direct, clear, simple language, because this was a moment for clarity. I said that no human vessel would be recalled from any location outside Sol space. I said there would be no apology, because the actions of our vessel in rescuing a Drenari crew from an unlawful detention were entirely justified. I said that Earth would not submit to any council review of any kind. And then I said the thing I had been preparing to say for 5 years. The Galactic Council's authority over Earth ended at the moment you chose to use that authority to exclude us, rather than to govern fairly. We acknowledge no jurisdiction. We accept no ultimatums. What we do accept is the possibility of a genuine conversation between equals, conducted without preconditions and without threats. If that is something the Council is capable of, we are available. If it is not, we will proceed without you. I sent it before Owen had finished reading it over my shoulder. He said, very calmly, "That is going to generate a response." "I know," I said. "A significant response." "I know that too." He picked up his tea. "Are we ready for a significant response?" I thought about Yara's drive specifications. I thought about Nathan Graves's facility operating at full capacity. I thought about Saren's metamaterial plating, and Derek Vane's tactical documentation of 3 Council ship vulnerabilities. I thought about the 6 civilizations Evan had mentioned, watching from the edges, waiting to see if we meant what we said. "Not completely," I said, "but we are ready enough." The Council's significant response arrived in 12 days instead of 20, which told me they had been working on it before my reply arrived. The decision to send a punitive fleet had been made early. The 20-day deadline was a formality, a last procedural step in a decision that had already been taken in the first hours after the enforcement ships reported what had happened to them. The fleet was 47 vessels. I received the intelligence from Patrick Dunn's network, which by this point had contacts in 4 different Council member systems, and which operated with the specific efficiency of people who were very good at being invisible in places that powerful organizations thought they controlled. Patrick sent me the fleet composition, the departure point, and the projected arrival timeline. 47 ships, Veth dreadnoughts, which were the largest combat vessels the Council operated, Krail interceptors, fast and maneuverable, Solvari siege platforms, which were slower but carried weapons capable of sustained bombardment. The Council had sent 47 ships to New Carthage. New Carthage was the name Saren had given the unclaimed system where the Pioneer 2 had made its first fold jump. It was not a colony yet, not formally, but we had a small installation there now, built in the 6 weeks since the first crossing, a relay station, and a fuel depot, and enough structural material to qualify as a permanent presence. 3 of our 6 converted ships were stationed there, 3 of ours against 47 of theirs. I sent Saren the fleet data the same hour I received it. Her reply came back in 4 hours, which told me she had read the data, thought about it thoroughly, and was not panicking, which was exactly the response I had expected from her, and exactly the response I needed. She wrote, "I need the other 3 ships here before they arrive, and I need you to trust me." I wrote back, "You have both." The other 3 ships left Jupiter within the day. Nathan Graves oversaw their departure personally, and sent me a message afterward that said only, "Travel safe." I appreciated the simplicity of that. I had 2 weeks before the Council fleet reached New Carthage. I used those 2 weeks to do 3 things. The first was to brief Earth's government fully on everything that was happening, which I should have done sooner, but had been managing carefully to prevent the kind of institutional panic that makes hard situations harder. The briefing took 9 hours, across 2 days. Some of what I told them was difficult to hear. Some of it generated exactly the panic I had been trying to avoid, but all of it was necessary, because the people I worked for had a right to understand what was being done in their name. The second was to contact Evan, not through Patrick's network, directly, on the frequency Evan had used to reach us during the enforcement incident. I told Evan what was coming. I told them our plan, in broad terms, and I asked them to reach out to the 6 civilizations they had mentioned, and pass them a specific message from me. The message was simple. If you want to see whether we mean what we say, watch what happens at New Carthage. The third thing I did was to record a broadcast, not for Earth, for the galaxy. I recorded it in the Council's standard communication format, which I knew would be automatically picked up by every Council relay station within range. and I transmitted it openly on the day the Council fleet crossed into the sector where New Carthage was located. I said what was true. I said it simply. No diplomatic framing, no careful language, no softening at the edges. I said that the Galactic Council had voted to exile Earth 5 years ago because we refused to accept limits on our population, our expansion, and our choice of where to put our ships and our people. I said we had used those 5 years to build something that did not require their permission to function. I said that a council fleet was currently moving to impose consequences on us for existing outside their jurisdiction, and that we intended to demonstrate that those consequences could not be imposed. I said that any civilization watching this who had ever been told by the council that they were too small, too young, too different, or too much, was welcome to reach out to us. I said it on every frequency the council used, and several they did not. Then I sat down in my office and waited, which was the hardest part. Cole Hartley, who had been my aide, and was now my director of development, and who I had come to rely on more than I had expected when he started, brought me dinner at 8 in the evening. He set it on the desk and sat across from me without being asked and said, "How are you actually doing?" It was such a direct question that it caught me off guard. Diplomats do not often ask each other how they are actually doing. They ask how things are going, which is not the same. "I am frightened," I said, because it was true, and because Cole was the kind of person who deserved honest answers. Saren is out there with 6 ships, and I am sitting here, and I cannot be there, and I cannot do anything, except wait. "You have done everything you could do," Cole said. "That is both reassuring and not reassuring at all," I said. He nodded. "I know." He picked up his fork and ate a bite of his own dinner, which he had also brought. I looked at the tactical projections Derek sent back, even accounting for the size difference. "And?" Cole thought about it for a moment. "I think Saren knows something about fighting that the Council does not know." "What is that?" "That the rules of the fight are decided by the person willing to rewrite them," he said. "Not the person with more ships." I looked at him for a moment. Then I picked up my fork. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "You," he said. "You told me that the day we landed back on Earth after Arcturus Station. I wrote it down. I did not remember saying it, but it sounded like something I would say on a day when everything I had been holding had finally let go." I ate my dinner. Outside my window, Earth rotated slowly in its orbit, blue and patient, 342 million people going about their lives. Sleeping, working, raising children, building things, arguing about small matters and large ones, as people do. 47 council ships were moving toward my daughter, and I had told her to trust the thing she had built, the thing we had all built together, and I needed to believe that was enough. I needed to believe it very much. On the 14th day, the council fleet reached the New Carthage system. I was watching the live feed from our relay station when their approach signatures appeared on the long-range instruments. 47 ships, moving in the standard Veth battle formation. Precise, orderly, 11,000 years of accumulated tactical knowledge, arranged in a configuration that had not needed to change in 4 centuries, because nothing had ever survived long enough to require them to change it. I had sent Saren every piece of intelligence I had about that formation. She had read it and sent back a single sentence. "I see it." That was 3 days ago. I had not heard from her since, because the communications blackout before engagement was standard procedure. One of the things Nathan Graves had insisted on when he worked out the basic tactical protocols for our ships with Derek Vane. You did not want anyone knowing your exact position from a signal trace in the minutes before a fight. So I sat in my office on Earth with Cole Hartley and Owen Dale and Nathan Graves, who had flown in from Ganymede 2 days ago and had not suggested going back, and we watched the relay feed together. It was not a real-time feed. There was a delay of several minutes due to signal transit time, but it was the best we had, and we watched it the way people watch the sky when there is weather they cannot control. The Council fleet entered the New Carthage system at 0300 hours Earth time. At 0302, they identified the relay station and the fuel depot and the small installation that Saren's crew had built in 6 weeks. They identified 3 human ships in a holding position above the second planet. At 0304, the Council fleet's flagship opened a communication channel. A Veth admiral, whose name the translation rendered as Fleet Commander Ossian, spoke in the flat, deliberate tone of someone reading from a very official document. He said that the human presence in this system was unauthorized, that our installation would be dismantled under council authority, and that our ships were to stand down and prepare for inspection and escort back to Sol space. He said this would happen immediately. On the relay feed, I watched the positioning of our 3 ships change. Not dramatically, a slight shift in orientation, something that someone watching a normal approach to a compliance demand would not have noticed. Then 3 more ships appeared on the feed. They had been behind the planet, parked in the planet's shadow on the far side, invisible to the Council fleet's approach sensors, because they had arrived 4 days ago and powered everything down to minimal operation. No drive signatures, no active sensors, no energy output above what background radiation would mask. Sitting in the dark, waiting. 6 ships total, all of them now oriented toward 47 Council vessels. Fleet Commander Ossian made his demand a second time. I had heard Saren's response later, in the official record. She had opened a channel to the entire Council fleet simultaneously and said, "We are aware of the demand. Our answer is no." That was all. What happened in the next 40 minutes on that relay feed was the most extraordinary thing I had seen in my life, and I had seen 40 years of galactic politics, which is not a short list of extraordinary things. The Council fleet moved into encirclement formation. They had used the same formation for centuries. It was geometrically optimal for surrounding and containing a smaller group of vessels. 3 anchor points, each one covered by a different weapons range, overlapping fields of fire. No gap for a target to slip through. They believed. Saren let them complete the formation. She waited until every Council ship was in position. Then she did something I did not expect, and I was her father, and I thought I understood how she thought. She broadcast the audio of the Council vote. Not on a private channel, on every open frequency in the system, the same recording she had played at the blockade line, the charges, the 11 votes, my voice, afterward, with the 7 words. She let it play twice. Then she said, into the same open channel, "We have heard this enough times. We will not hear it again." She gave the fold drive activation order. What the Council fleet experienced, in the next 4 minutes, was something their tactical manuals had no entry for. 6 human ships that had been in a contained position inside their encirclement simply stopped being in that position. Not by breaking through the encirclement, not by accelerating toward a gap, by translating, by being somewhere, and then being somewhere else, with no transit time in between. They appeared inside the formation, not outside trying to break in, inside, among them. At close range, in the spaces between Council ships where the big weapons arrays had minimum targeting angles because they had been designed for enemies that approached from outside, not for enemies that materialized in the middle. Our 6 ships did not try to destroy the Council fleet. They went after specific systems, specific targets, specific components on specific ships. Derek Vane's tactical work. He had built the targeting protocols based on his years of monitoring Council enforcement operations, and he had identified the cascade vulnerabilities in Veth dreadnought systems, and Krell interceptor shielding, and Solvari siege platform propulsion. Hit the right things in the right order, and you did not need to destroy a ship. You needed only to make it stop. I watched the relay feed for 40 minutes, and I watched 47 Council vessels become debris, and drifting hulls, and crippled platforms, and, eventually, 7 ships that were operational enough to continue being a problem. Those 7 ships my daughter caught with fold jumps to their exit vectors, which they had tried to use to flee, and which she had predicted they would use. In the final minutes of the relay feed, I watched those 7 ships receive a human boarding party for the first time in the history of 2 species meeting in space. Cole was sitting next to me. He had not said a single word during the 40 minutes of the engagement. Neither had I. Neither had Owen. Nathan had left the room at some point and come back without any of us noticing him go. When the feed showed the boarding parties completing their entry, Cole finally spoke. "One ship lost," he said. He had been tracking it. "The Meridian." "Yes," I said. "11 crew." "Yes." We were quiet together for a moment. "I want their names," I said. "I have them," Cole said. He handed me a page. He had written them by hand, which surprised me, and then did not. because Cole had been writing things by hand since I had known him. I read each name aloud, all 11. Then I sat with the weight of them for a minute, which was not enough time, but it was the time I had. Outside my window, Earth was beginning its morning on the Western Hemisphere. Lights coming on, people beginning their days, not one of them knowing yet what had just happened in a system 43 light-years away, where their daughter, or their navigator, or their engineer, had either come home or had not. I picked up my personal device and started writing the message I would send to each of the 11 families. I wrote every word myself, no form, no template, each name, each sentence, built from scratch, because these were people, and the least I could give them was the specific truth of who their person had been and what they had been part of. It took me 4 hours. When I was done, I sent them all, and then I sat in the quiet of my office for a while, and I thought about what we were building, and what it cost, and whether it was worth the cost, which was not a question I had an answer to that would satisfy everyone, including sometimes myself. But then I thought about the 47 ships that would never again park in front of a smaller civilization and tell them to comply or face consequences. I thought about the 7 ship commanders who had come aboard our vessels and been treated better than their own protocols required, who were at this moment in transit to New Carthage to have a conversation with Saren about choices. I thought about Evan and the 6 civilizations watching from the edges, deciding whether to step forward. I thought about a species on a green planet 43 light-years away that reached outward in signals they did not know anyone could hear, and a ship that had told them, "We hear you." I thought about all of it for a long time, and then I got up and went back to work. I did not sleep the night before the battle. That was not unusual. I had not slept well since leaving Soul Space. There was something about being 43 light-years from home, in a ship with 43 people, who had put their trust in me, that made rest feel like a luxury, borrowed from a future I was not certain about. I used the night hours instead. I walked the ship. The Pioneer 2 was not a large vessel. You could walk its full length in about 12 minutes at a comfortable pace. I had learned the habit of walking it in the hours before anything difficult, moving through each section, checking on things that did not need checking, which was not really what I was doing. What I was doing was reminding myself of the weight of each of those 43 people. Barry Cole was asleep in engineering, with his boots still on, which he always did when there was something important coming. He claimed it was so he could get to work faster in an emergency. His crewmates claimed he simply fell asleep before he got around to taking them off. Both things were probably true. Lena Park was at the navigation station doing calculations she did not need to do yet, because Lena Park prepared for everything 3 times before it happened, and was therefore the calmest person I had ever met in a genuine emergency. Derek Vane was sitting at the tactical station in the dark with a single light on, going through targeting sequences one more time. He had done this yesterday and the day before. He did not speak when I came in. I did not speak either. I sat across from him for 10 minutes and then moved on, and that was enough. I came back to the command room at 02:30 and sat in the chair and looked at the long-range data on the forward display. The Council fleet was 13 hours away. I had been in space for 5 years, on various assignments and expeditions. I had been in difficult situations. I had been in one brief skirmish with a Krell patrol that had gotten confused about territorial markings near the outer colonies, which had lasted about 4 minutes and had not involved anything more dangerous than some harsh words over the communication channel. I had never commanded a ship in a genuine engagement. None of us had. That was the thing none of our tactical planning could fully account for. I picked up the ship's internal communication and opened a channel to every section. "This is Saren Morrow," I said. "I am not going to give you a speech. You know what tomorrow is. You know what we are here for. You know this ship and you know each other, and you know what we have built and why we built it. That is more than most people get before a day like this. I am grateful to be here with you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I am grateful." I closed the channel and sat in the dark for a while. At 0400 I got a message from my father. It had been sent hours earlier and had been routed through the relay station, arriving with the slight delay that distance imposed on everything. He did not say anything about the Council fleet. He did not give advice or instructions or reassurance. He sent me a single audio file. It was a recording of a man's voice, someone I did not recognize, reading a poem in Welsh. I did not speak Welsh. My father did. Barely. Because his father had taught him the same way his father had taught him. Imperfectly, and with great love. But the poem's translation was included in the file, and I read it while the audio played. It was about the sea. About going out in a small boat when the weather was uncertain. About the difference between the courage of people who go anyway, and the wisdom of people who wait. It was not a dramatic poem. It was quiet and specific, and it talked about the color of light on water in a particular way that made the thing it was describing real. When it finished, I listened to it again. I do not know what my father intended me to take from it. Maybe nothing specific. Maybe just the fact that he had thought of me in the night and reached for something beautiful to send, because that was what he did when words were not enough. I kept the file and went back to watching the long-range data. The Council fleet arrived at the outer edge of the New Carthage system at 0302, which was 9 minutes earlier than my best projection. They had been pushing their drives. That told me something about their confidence. People who are very certain they are going to win do not push their drives to arrive early. People who want to get it over with push their drives. They were not as confident as they looked. Fleet Commander Ossian's demand came over the open channel at 0304. I had read the intelligence file on Ossian 3 times. He was a Veth flag officer with 40 years of enforcement experience, which meant 40 years of telling smaller civilizations to stand down and watching them do it. His record was impeccable, and his tactical approach was conservative, which in his career had been an advantage, because conservative against forces that knew they would lose was all you needed. Conservative against forces that were going to rewrite the premises of the fight was a different thing. I let him finish his demand. I let him make it twice. Then I opened the channel and said we were aware of the demand, and our answer was no. I heard someone in the tactical section behind me make a very quiet sound of satisfaction. Then I played the recording, my father's voice, those 7 words, filling the system on every open frequency. Then we will build something you cannot exile. I let it echo for a moment. Then I said the line I had been saving since we crossed the blockade line 3 weeks ago. We have heard this enough times. We will not hear it again. And I gave the full drive activation order. The Council fleet had arranged themselves in a configuration they called the Iron Cradle. It was a standard encirclement formation, geometrically beautiful if you like that sort of thing. Each ship positioned at precise intervals to create overlapping weapons coverage with no gaps. Their tactical doctrine at this point was straightforward. Hold formation. Wait for the smaller force to attempt a break. Pick them off at the edges. They had no doctrine for what we did. 6 human ships, all of us folding simultaneously from our holding position into the interior of their formation, appearing in the spaces between their vessels, at ranges the Council fleet's tactical systems were not calibrated to handle, because those systems had been built for enemies approaching from outside. Not enemies that appeared inside. We were among them before they finished processing the disappearance from our previous position. In the first 90 seconds, Derek hit both of the nearest dreadnoughts in their sensor arrays, which disrupted their targeting and prevented them from coordinating their fire. Lena folded us twice in rapid succession, appearing first at the port side of a Krell interceptor and then behind a Solvari siege platform. Both times at a range that let us address their propulsion systems before they could bring their weapons to bear on a target that kept moving in ways they did not have a response for. The other 5 ships were doing the same thing. Each of them had a specific sequence of targets and a specific order of approach that Derek and the other tactical officers had worked out over 2 weeks of planning. Not a rigid plan, a framework. Because Derek had said, in the planning session I remembered very clearly, that rigid plans were for people who intended to control the fight. Frameworks were for people who intended to survive it. I do not want to describe the 40 minutes of the battle as anything other than what it was. It was loud and frightening, and 2 of our ships took genuine hits in the first 20 minutes from Council vessels that managed to get targeting locks before their systems were disrupted. The Pioneer 2 took a hit in the midsection that knocked out one of our secondary power conduits and caused a fire in the cargo bay that Barry Cole's team had contained in 4 minutes, but which had felt, in those 4 minutes, like an eternity. And we lost the Meridian. I was not watching it happen. I found out afterward, from the record. A Veth dreadnought, the largest ship in the Council fleet, had managed a targeting solution on the Meridian during the confusion of the first 15 minutes. The Meridian's fold drive had been spooling for a translation, but had not completed the cycle. The hit landed on their primary power system. 11 people. I knew their names already. I had learned everyone's names, because that was a thing I had decided mattered. But in the 40 minutes of the battle, I did not know yet. I found out only in the aftermath, when the tactical records were complete, and I sat with that knowledge for a long time, before I let myself keep moving. The 7 ships we caught at their exit vectors were the last to understand what was happening to them. 3 of them were trying to use the hyperspace relay network to flee, which required a preparation cycle of several minutes. Lena tracked their approach vectors and folded us to intercept each one. We appeared at their exit points before they completed their transition cycles. The expression on the face of the Solvari captain when I opened a communication channel to her ship, after her propulsion was disabled and her weapons were offline, was something I did not expect. I had expected anger. I had expected the cold contempt that species with long histories of authority tend to produce when authority fails them. What I saw instead was calculation, a very fast, very intelligent mind, working through the mathematics of a situation that had just changed completely, looking for the new equilibrium. I said, "Your crew is safe. Your ship is disabled but intact. We are not going to harm anyone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in her own language with the translation coming a half-second behind, "What do you want?" "To talk," I said. The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. "About what?" she said. "About choices," I said. "About what the last 40 minutes means for how the next 40 years work. About whether the Council's approach to the rest of the galaxy is something you personally believe in, or something you have been doing because it was the job." Another silence. Shorter this time. "You are very direct for a human diplomat," she said. "I am not a diplomat," I said. "I am a navigator. The diplomacy is my father's department. I am just the one who crossed the line." She looked at me for a long moment. I held her look without changing my expression. Outside the ship, her 3 disabled colleagues were receiving similar communications from my other vessels. The remaining defeated Council ships were floating in various states of immobility, around a system they had arrived in 4 hours ago, fully expecting to own. The Solvari captain said, "I would like to speak to whoever is in charge on your side." "That would be me right now," I said. "My father is on Earth." "Then yes," she said, "I would like to talk." She was not the only one. Of the 7 surviving ships, 4 of them opened communication channels within the hour. 2 remained silent for several hours more before one of them, a Krell interceptor commander, finally opened his channel and asked if the conversation was still available. I told him yes. I told all of them yes, because that was the thing the Council had never understood about us. We were not here because we wanted to destroy something. We were here because we wanted to build something. Those are not the same goal. They require entirely different approaches. The Council had spent 40 years trying to manage humanity the way you manage a threat. Contain it. Limit it. Keep it inside the boundaries you set, and enforce those boundaries with consequences. What you get when you do that, to something that does not accept the premise of its own containment, is not compliance. What you get is this: 47 ships and 6 human vessels in a system no one had been supposed to be in, and 4 Council commanders asking if they could have a conversation with the species that had just rewritten the rules they thought they were fighting under. Lena came up beside me while I was watching the tactical display show the final positions of every ship in the system. She said, "All 6 of our ships are reporting operational status. Damage to Pioneer 2 is repairable in transit. The other ships have minor damage. All personnel safe except for the Meridian." She said the last part quietly. "I know," I said. "The fuel depot is intact. The installation is intact. The relay station is intact." "Good." She looked at the display for a moment. Then she said, "What do we do with 40 ship crews?" It was a reasonable question. We had, in a technical sense, just captured the personnel of 40 Council vessels. That was several thousand people who needed to be processed in some way. I thought about what my father had said in his message, years ago, the one he sent after the Council vote. He had said, "Tell them exactly what happened, and do not soften it." He had said that because he believed in the truth being available without decoration. I thought about what the truth of this moment was. "We talked to them," I said. "The same offer I made to the 4 who already called. All of them. Every commander, every crew member who wants to hear it. We tell them who we are, what we are building, and we give them the same choice we give everyone. Which choice is that? To be returned to the council as living witnesses to what they encountered, I said, or to be part of something new. Lena looked at me for a moment. How many of them do you think will choose the second option? I thought about the Solvari captain's face. The calculation in her eyes. The question, what do you want? Asked by someone who had already started revising their understanding of the situation. More than the council expects, I said. Outside the Pioneer 2's forward panels, the new Carthage system was quiet. Stars, planets, the small installation on the second moon that we had built without permission, the relay station, the fuel depot, and 47 council ships in various states of stillness, surrounding 6 human vessels that were whole and present, and exactly where they intended to be. We had come from nowhere, they would say afterward. We had appeared inside their formation from empty space. We had disabled rather than destroyed. We had offered conversation to people who had come to impose silence. We had done all of this in a system no one had named until my ship got there, which I had named New Carthage because Carthage was a city that an empire tried to erase, and which had not been fully erasable after all. Names matter. Where you put things matters. What you do when someone tells you that you are not allowed to exist in a particular place matters enormously. We had just proven all 3 of those things at once, and I was tired in every part of myself, and I was proud in every part of myself, and I was thinking about 11 names, and I was looking at the stars of New Carthage, and thinking about what came next. There was a lot to do. There was always a lot to do. We started immediately. The first conversation with the Solvari captain, whose name translated as Mira Vass, lasted 4 hours. She was not what I expected, which meant I had expected the wrong thing, which was a mistake I intended to make less often as I got older. I had built a mental model of council officers as true believers in the council's authority. It seemed the most logical explanation for why anyone would spend decades enforcing a system of control over other species without apparent discomfort. Mira Vass was not a true believer. She was someone who had joined the fleet at 22 because it was the clearest available path to a career with structure and purpose, and who had spent 30 years doing a job competently and professionally, without ever stopping to ask whether the job itself was justified. She had the particular kind of honesty that comes from having nothing left to be strategic about, and in 4 hours, she told me more about how the council's internal reasoning worked than I had learned in 40 years of my father's diplomatic reports. The council, according to Mira Vass, did not think of itself as a controlling power. It thought of itself as a stabilizing power. There was, in their internal culture, a concept that translated roughly as the weight of order. The idea that the galaxy required management. That without the council's framework, species would expand into conflict. Resources would be fought over. The smaller civilizations would be consumed by the larger ones. The council was not restricting the galaxy's freedom. It was protecting the galaxy from itself, I said, and when a species objects to being protected. Mira Vass looked at her hands for a moment. The assumption is that objection comes from youth, from not yet understanding the necessity of order. The expectation is that they will understand, eventually. And if they never do? She looked up at me. The council has not often encountered that situation. You are encountering it now, I said. Yes, she said. We are. I asked her what she would tell the council when she was returned. She said she had not decided whether to be returned. I told her that was a choice she could take her time making. She said she appreciated that. I talked to 9 more commanders that first day, and 11 the next. Not all of them were like Mira Vass. Some of them were angry, in the way that people are angry when they are frightened and do not want to admit the fear. Some of them refused to have any conversation that was not about their legal rights as detained personnel under council prisoner protocols, which I was careful to respect, even though the protocols had been written by an institution I did not recognize as having authority over me. But more of them than I expected were like Mira Vass. Tired people, experienced people, people who had been doing a job for a long time and who were, for the first time in that job, being asked to think about it rather than simply perform it. On the 3rd day at New Carthage, I received a relay message from my father. He had watched the engagement data with his team in Geneva. He had read the preliminary reports. He had seen the casualty list. He had, he said in the message, sat with it for a day before writing back. He said, "The 11 names are on the wall in my office. They will stay there. Everything we build from here, we build knowing what it cost." Then he said, "The 6 civilizations Evan mentioned, all 6 of them have made contact in the last 48 hours. Through different channels, different intermediaries, but all of them saying the same thing. They saw what happened at New Carthage. They want to know if the invitation is still open," he said. I told them yes. I read the message twice. Then I forwarded it to my crew with no additional comment, because they deserved to know what their days at New Carthage had accomplished beyond the immediate tactical result. Barry Cole sent me a message back within 10 minutes. He said, 6 more civilizations. That is going to require a lot more fuel depots. I wrote back, "Start the calculations." He responded in 30 seconds with a preliminary logistics framework that was clearly something he had been building in his spare time for weeks. That was Barry Cole, always ready for what came next, because he had decided some time ago that what came next was worth being ready for. On the 5th day, Mira Vass told me she had made her decision. She was not going back to the council. She wanted to understand more about what we were building before committing to any specific role in it. But she was not going to a council processing station to file reports about what had happened, and then return to a fleet command structure that was going to spend considerable energy deciding whose fault this was. 3 other commanders made the same decision in the next 2 days. The remaining 39 crews were transported back to a council relay point using 2 of the less damaged council ships that we had repaired enough to make the journey, crewed by their own personnel who had chosen to return. We gave them a full copy of the tactical record of the engagement, unedited. We gave them a formal statement from me describing the events and the principles behind each decision we had made, and we gave them the open communication frequency that anyone could reach us on. Derek watched the returning ships fold into their transit point and said, very quietly, "The report they bring back is going to make a very uncomfortable council session." "That is the point," I said. "Do you think the council will try again? Another fleet?" I thought about it genuinely, because it was a genuine question. The council had 47 ships and had come back with 7, and 4 of those 7 had declined to return at all. The political fallout inside the council system was going to be significant and was going to take time to settle, but they had resources. They had allies within their membership. They had 11,000 years of institutional inertia that did not simply stop because of one engagement. "Eventually," I said, "but not soon, and by the time they do, we will have built something they cannot match with one fleet." Derek nodded. He looked out the forward panel at New Carthage, at the installation on the second moon, at the relay station, at the fuel depot, at a system that 4 weeks ago had been empty marked space on a council archive, and that was now the site of the most significant military engagement in a century. "We should name the planet," he said. I thought about that. I had called the system New Carthage. The planet needed its own name. "What do you think?" I asked him. Derek looked at the planet for a while. Green and wide-oceaned, visible in the forward panels, the 3rd planet of a 7-planet system 43 light-years from Sol. The place where 6 human ships had rewritten the Council's understanding of what the universe contained. "Threshold," he said. I said, "Yes, Threshold." We stayed at New Carthage for 3 more weeks, establishing a proper installation, not just a relay point, but a real one, with living quarters and a workshop, and a growing list of purposes as more and more people arrived. 2 of the ships that came from Jupiter to resupply carried personnel who had requested assignment there specifically, people who had heard what happened and wanted to be at the place where it had happened. Evan arrived at the end of the 3rd week with 2 Drenari technical advisors and a set of detailed star charts covering a region of space that the Council's survey program had never formally mapped. They were charts that Evan's people had been making privately for 60 years, building toward exactly this kind of moment. I met them at the docking bay, and we stood together on the threshold of the installation and looked at Threshold's surface visible through the observation panels. Evan said, 5 years ago, in the chamber, I voted for you, and then I watched you walk out, and I did not know if what I had helped set in motion was going to matter. And now? I said. Evan looked at the planet, at the stars, at the installation around us full of people working on something that had not existed before, and that was growing every week. Now, Evan said, I know. We went inside together. There was a meeting scheduled in an hour about the 6 new civilizations and how to structure their first contact with what we were building. Then there was a planning session about the next phase of fold route development. Then there was a logistics review with Barry Cole that I had been postponing for 4 days because Barry's logistics reviews were thorough to the point of heroism, and I needed to be well rested for them. A lot to do. Always a lot to do. I thought of my father, in his office on Earth with 11 names on his wall, getting up every day and going back to work. I thought of Yara Osei running her second-generation equations at the Jupiter facility, already thinking about the third generation. I thought of Nathan Graves walking the floor of the shipyard at dawn, drinking his coffee, holding something enormous together. I thought of 11 people who had gone out in the Meridian and had not come back. I carried all of it. That was what it meant to be part of this. You carried all of it, the weight and the work and the cost and the purpose, and you went to the next meeting, and the one after that, and you kept building the thing you said you were going to build, because the only honest answer to the question of what you were doing with the time you had been given was to use it for something that would outlast you. The galaxy was watching. 6 civilizations were making contact. The Council was generating a report that would upend its internal politics for years. And we had work to do. The hall had no official name yet, which I thought was appropriate for a building that was still being finished. The construction crews had worked on it for 11 months, and the interior was complete, but the exterior was still being fitted with the cladding panels that Saren had designed to handle New Carthage's particular atmospheric conditions. You could see the stars through the structural panels above the main chamber, while the walls were still going up around you, which someone had decided was not a flaw but a feature. By the time the first representatives arrived for the signing, the roof was on but 3 walls were still bare steel, and 2 large construction lights were pointed at the ceiling to supplement the interior lighting. Nobody complained. I had been living on New Carthage for 5 months by then. My office was a converted storage module with a view of threshold from one corner window if you stood at exactly the right angle. I had not been back to Earth in 4 months, which was longer than I had intended, but every week something needed the kind of attention that could not be managed from a relay message, and I had gradually stopped planning my return trips because I kept canceling them. Owen Dale ran the Earthside operation with a precision that meant I was not actually needed there for most decisions, which was either a compliment to him or a reflection on my absence, and I chose to consider it the former. Cole Hartley had become the primary interface between our growing network of new partners and the Earth government, a role he handled with a combination of enthusiasm and organizational rigor that made everyone around him either deeply reassured or exhausted, depending on their nature. The 6 civilizations that had made contact after New Carthage had become 9 by the time the hall was ready. 3 more had reached out through the network that Evan's quiet diplomatic work had been building for years, each one arriving with a different history and a different set of concerns, but with the same fundamental question underneath all of it. Is there genuinely room for us here, and do you mean what you say? I had answered that question the same way every time. I had invited them to come and see, not to read our proposals, not to receive our assurances, to come and see what we were actually doing, and make their own assessment of whether it matched the words. Most of them had come. The Kuuri arrived in their own ships, which surprised the other representatives until we explained. The Kuuri were a mammalian species that the Council had classified as pre-political and barred from independent space travel 30 years ago, on the grounds that they had not yet achieved, quote, sufficient civilizational stability for independent transit. What the Council had not known, because the Kuuri had not told them, was that the Kuuri had been building their own vessels in underground facilities for 28 of those 30 years. Their lead delegate, a woman named Orsa, arrived at New Carthage in a ship of Kuuri manufacture that looked nothing like any Council-designed vessel, because the Kuuri had not had access to Council engineering resources and had therefore built around entirely different principles. When Nathan Graves saw it on the approach, he sent me a message that said only, "We need to talk to their engineers immediately." I introduced him to Orsa and left them alone for 3 hours, which turned out to be exactly the right decision, because they emerged with a shared set of 17 questions and a plan to spend the next week working through them together, and that collaboration eventually produced 3 innovations in hull design that became standard across our shipbuilding program within 2 years. The point was not that our way was the only way. That had been the Council's assumption. That had been the Council's first and most fundamental error. The point was that every civilization had things it understood that others did not, and the question was whether you were building a structure that made sharing those things possible, or building a structure that required everyone to give them up. The Council built the second kind. We intended to build the first. Mira Voss was at New Carthage for the signing. She had spent 4 months working with Derek Vane on a comprehensive assessment of Council military doctrine and its implications for our tactical planning, and in the process had become something that neither of them had anticipated, which was a genuine collaborator. Derek had told me 3 months in that working with her had changed his understanding of how Council enforcement decisions were actually made, and that it had not made him less wary of the Council, but had made him significantly better at predicting them. Mira had told me, around the same time, that she had been wrong about a great many things for a long time, and that the specific experience of having to examine a belief system you had considered self-evident was not comfortable, but was apparently necessary. I told her that description applied to a fair number of people in my life, starting with myself. She had looked at me with the sharp, measuring look that I had come to recognize as Mira's version of reassessment, and then she had nodded once and gone back to work. The day before the signing, I walked the hall by myself in the early morning. The construction lights were off, and the facility's regular lighting gave the bare steel walls a quality that was not quite beautiful, but was very much present. I walked the full length of the main chamber, which was large enough for the representatives of 9 civilizations to sit without any of them feeling crowded, and I thought about the last time I had walked the full length of a diplomatic chamber. Arcturus Station, the Council Chamber, 11 red lights and 1 green one. This chamber had no lights of that kind. It had chairs of 9 different designs, each one built to accommodate the specific physical requirements of the species it was for, because Lena Park had spent 3 weeks in correspondence with each representative group, asking what they needed before anyone thought about aesthetics. The table at the center was round, which was a deliberate choice that nobody had needed to have explained to them when it was proposed. No head, no hierarchy. A shape that implied that everyone sitting at it was facing everyone else at the same distance. I sat down in the human chair, which was exactly the same as the others in terms of its position at the table, but which had a smaller cushion, because humans are generally smaller than 3 of the 9 species present. I sat there in the empty room and looked at the 8 empty chairs around me. 8 civilizations that had been told, in various ways and at various times, that they were not ready, or not appropriate, or not compliant enough, or not what the Council needed from them at this particular moment. 8 civilizations that had watched a human ship cross a blockade line and fold into unclaimed space, and say no to an ultimatum, and show up at a fight outnumbered, and come back anyway. 8 civilizations that had decided, on the basis of that evidence, to find out if the invitation was genuine. I was not going to let it be anything other than genuine. I was not capable of it. I had spent my career in diplomatic service in a system that told me to be careful with language, to qualify and hedge and preserve flexibility, and in that system I had been moderately effective and consistently frustrated. The thing I had been building for the last 2 years was not built on careful language. It was built on saying exactly what you meant, and then doing exactly what you said. The signing ceremony began at noon. 9 species represented by 19 individuals, which worked out that way because some of the smaller civilizations had sent 2 delegates, and some had sent 1, and nobody had made an issue of the asymmetry, because asymmetry was not the same as inequality. I had thought about what to say for weeks. In the end, I had 2 pages of notes that I did not use, because when I stood at the head of the table and looked around at all of those faces, the notes were clearly the wrong thing. I said, I am going to tell you the truth about what we are and what we are not. I said we were not a new authority. We were not a replacement for the Council. We were not a system of governance that would require anyone to limit their population, or register their colony ships, or submit their quarterly demographics to a central oversight body. I said we were not a military alliance, though we would protect our members, because you did not invite people to stand with you, and then leave them to stand alone. I said we were an agreement, a practical agreement between civilizations that had decided, each for their own reasons, that the galaxy they wanted to live in was not the one currently on offer, and that building a different one required them to work together. I said the structure was simple. Equal voice, no veto power assigned by age or size, shared resources, contributed according to capacity and drawn according to need. Mutual defense, meaning that harm to one of us was a matter for all of us. Open borders for the movement of people and goods between member worlds, because the Council's monopoly on transit had been the single most effective tool it used to control the species that depended on it, and we did not intend to replicate that tool. I said that anyone who wanted to join what we were building was welcome. Full stop. Any civilization, any size, any history. The only condition was that you came in good faith, meaning you agreed with the basic principle that every species in the galaxy had the right to determine its own future, without requiring another species' permission to do so. I said that we would almost certainly make mistakes. We were not going to be perfect. What we were going to be was honest about the mistakes when we made them, and committed to fixing them, and willing to hear from the people we had made them against. I said the structure did not have a name yet, because I had not wanted to name it before the people who were going to be part of it had a chance to weigh in on what it should be called. It would need a name. Names mattered. But the name would come from everyone present, not from us. Then I stopped talking and sat down, because anything else would have been filling space that did not need to be filled. The Drenari delegate, who was not Evan but a younger colleague named Sel, spoke first. They said that the Drenari had been in the Council for 60 years, and that in 60 years, the Council had asked them 11 times to change something fundamental about their society to maintain their membership, and had never once asked what the Drenari needed. Orsa of the Kuuri spoke. She said that her people had spent 30 years building ships in secret because they had decided that the right to go where they wished in their own galaxy was not something that should require 30 years of negotiation with a body that had never consulted them in the first place. A delegate from the Vathrin, a species I had known very little about until 6 months ago, spoke at length about what it had meant to their civilization to be classified as pre-commercial by the Council's economic registry, which meant they could not establish formal trade relationships without a licensed Veth intermediary, who took a percentage of every transaction. They had been a pre-commercial world for 40 years. Their economy had been structured to keep them that way. Each representative spoke. I listened to all of it. I had asked them to bring their actual experiences, not diplomatic statements, and they had done so. And listening to it was not easy, because it was not meant to be easy. It was meant to be true. When the last delegate had spoken, there was a pause, long enough to feel like the room was breathing. Then the Vathrin delegate asked about the name. I said, as I had promised, that it should come from everyone. We spent 2 hours on it. Proposals were made and discussed and combined and rejected and revised. It was the most genuinely democratic process I had been part of in my life, and it was occasionally chaotic and occasionally very funny, and at one point produced a suggestion that everyone in the room agreed was terrible, and which generated the first laughter we had all shared. The final name came from Orsa. She proposed it quietly, in the middle of a moment when the room was looking for something to converge on. She said, "The Terran Commonwealth." She said Terran, because the humans had started it, which was simply the truth. She said Commonwealth, because the old word meant something specific that she had learned from studying Earth's history, that it meant the common good, shared between members, and that was what they were describing. Nobody voted against it. Several delegates expressed it in their own languages, turning it over, and seemed satisfied with what came out. I wrote it down in the first official document of the organization, the Terran Commonwealth. We signed the document in the early afternoon, 19 signatures in 9 different scripts, on a sheet of paper that Lena Park had insisted on making actual paper, because she said that some things should be physical, and I agreed with her. Outside the hall, through the structural panels where the walls were still going up, Threshold was visible in the middle distance, a planet in a system that had been empty marked space 2 years ago. The installation around us hummed with people and work, and the specific noise of things being figured out. Yuvan came to stand beside me after the signing was complete. The room was full of conversation, delegates talking to each other with the energy of people who have just done something they have been working toward for a long time. Evan said, "In the council chamber, 5 years ago, I watched Kale Morrow walk out of a room that had just told humanity it was not welcome anywhere in the galaxy. I believed something would happen. I did not know what. I did not know how long. I did not know that it would happen here. Neither did he, I said. Neither did any of us. That is what makes it genuine, Evan said. I looked at the document on the table. 19 signatures, 9 languages. We are not finished, I said. No, Evan agreed. We have barely started. We stayed at New Carthage for 3 more weeks after the signing. There was a great deal to organize. Working groups were established for economic exchange, defensive coordination, scientific cooperation, and cultural contact protocols. People who had never met before sat at tables together and found that the work of building something created its own kind of common ground, faster than any formal introduction ever could. On the last evening before I flew back to Earth, I walked to the edge of the installation and sat on a flat piece of rock at the perimeter and looked at Threshold. The planet was green and wide-oceaned, and it turned slowly in the distance, with no knowledge of what had just happened above it. The chorus of organisms on its surface was still transmitting. We had listened to it every day since we arrived, and it had become a kind of background to the work, not ignored, just present, the way things that are continuously true become present rather than urgent. I thought about the second planet in the system, where we had made first contact, where the organisms that did not know they were transmitting were still reaching outward in the only way they knew. I thought about what we had sent them, "We hear you." I thought about what it meant that we had heard them, and what it meant that they could not yet hear us back. "We hear you" was not just for them. It was the name of everything we were doing. Every civilization the Council had decided did not qualify for the table. Every species classified as pre-something, or non-compliant, or insufficiently stable. Every world that had been reaching outward in its own way, and had received, in return, the Council's long and polished silence. "We hear you." "We built you a table. Pull up a chair." I sat there until the light changed, and then I went inside to finish packing, and in the morning, I went home. The flight back to Earth took 3 days with 1 relay point stop, not a fold transit, which would have taken 40 seconds. I had chosen the longer route deliberately. There was something I needed to do on the way back that required time. I had carried the 11 names from the Meridian for the full 2 years since New Carthage, not metaphorically. I had written them on a card that I kept in my jacket pocket, and I read them sometimes, not as a ritual of grief, but as a practice of remembering that the thing we were building was not abstract. It was made of people. Specific people with specific names who had gotten on a ship and crossed a line because someone had asked them to. Their families deserved something from me that I had not yet managed to give them. Not a form letter, not a standard message of condolence from a diplomatic office. Something real, which required me to find the real things to say, which required me to sit with it long enough to know what the real things were. I spent the 3 days of the flight writing, not 1 letter, 11 of them. I wrote about each person specifically. I wrote about what I had seen of them in the weeks before New Carthage, the things they had done that I remembered because I made it a practice to remember. One of them had spent his off hours building a model of the Pioneer 2 from scrap components because he said it helped him understand the ship from the outside. One of them had taught 3 of her crewmates a card game from her home city that she had learned from her grandmother, and I had walked into the crew lounge one evening to find 4 people arguing loudly about the rules, which she claimed she had explained perfectly, and which they claimed she had explained not at all. One of them had asked me, on the second day after we crossed the blockade line, whether I thought the organisms on the second planet were beautiful. I had said I thought anything that reached outward towards something larger than itself was beautiful. He had thought about that for a moment and then said, "Yes, that is a good way to think about it." I wrote all of it down, for each of them, and put the letters in the outgoing message queue, and they arrived at 11 families on Earth before I did. I received the first response before we landed. It was from the mother of the crewman who had built the model, a woman named Grace who lived in a small town in New Zealand, and who wrote, in a short reply that I saved and kept, that she had been waiting for something that told her what her son had been part of, rather than simply what had happened to him, and that the letter I had written did that, and that she was grateful. I landed on Earth at dawn, and went directly to my office in Geneva, and looked at the wall where Cole had put up the 11 names, printed and framed, the day after the casualty report came in. They had been there for 2 years. They would stay there. Cole was already at his desk when I arrived, which was not surprising, because Cole was always already at his desk. He looked up and said, "Welcome back," and then immediately said, "You have 17 messages requiring decision in the next 2 days, and the Vathrin Economic Working Group wants to schedule their first formal session, and Nathan Graves is asking whether the fold route expansion plan can be accelerated." "Good morning to you too," I said. He smiled and handed me the priority message stack. I sat down at my desk and started reading. The weeks that followed the signing were among the busiest I had experienced, which was a comparison against a baseline that had included some genuinely unreasonable weeks. The formation of the Terran Commonwealth had generated interest far beyond the 9 founding members. We had received contact from 4 more civilizations within the first month, each one in a different situation, but each one having watched the same sequence of events and made the same assessment. The assessment was not, it turned out, primarily about military capability, though New Carthage had provided evidence of that. The assessment was about character, about what we did when we could do otherwise. People talked about New Carthage as the moment that changed things, and it was. But the moment that changed things for most of the civilizations that contacted us was something smaller and quieter. It was the fact that we had offered conversation to the commanders who came aboard our ships after the engagement. It was the fact that we had sent those commanders home with an unedited record of what had happened. It was the fact that we had named the planet Threshold, which said something about what we thought a place like that was for. Small things accumulate, especially when the people watching them have been watching the Council for a very long time. I worked on Earth for 6 weeks before flying to Threshold again, which was what everyone was calling it by then. The installation had grown significantly in my absence. Nathan Graves had moved the core of his operations from Ganymede, and there were now 2 full shipbuilding facilities under construction on Threshold's larger moon, using local materials wherever possible, and supplemented by what Orsa's Kuuri engineers had learned about non-standard hull construction. The result, Nathan told me when I arrived, was ships that were better in 3 specific structural categories than anything we had built before. Yara was there too, working on the 3rd-generation fold drive in a lab that occupied what had been the original fuel depot before the fuel depot was expanded and moved to a better location. She had 3 researchers with her, and was conducting tests on a scale that required the outer system's empty space rather than anything closer to a planet. And the preliminary results were, in Yara's carefully calibrated assessment, extremely promising. In Yara's language, extremely promising meant the equations were doing things that made her calm, in a way that only happened when she knew something was going to work. Mira Vass had been promoted, not by us, which would have been inappropriate. She had effectively promoted herself by becoming the person most qualified to do the work that most needed doing, which was the development of a joint defensive coordination framework for the Commonwealth's growing membership. She had 9 people working with her, 3 of them from species other than human, and she ran the team with the same conservative precision she had applied to Fleet Command, which in this context was genuinely useful. I asked her, 3 months after the signing, whether she had any regrets. She said she had many regrets about specific decisions over a long career, and that this was appropriate because a person who had spent decades making consequential decisions without accumulating any regrets had probably not been paying sufficient attention. Then she said she had no regrets about being at New Carthage. I said the same was true for me. We understood each other well enough by then that neither of us felt the need to say anything further. The Council was not silent. Of course it was not. They had lost 47 ships, and then watched 19 representatives from 9 civilizations sign a document on a planet the Council had not given them permission to occupy. Their internal response, from what our intelligence network now provided in reasonably good detail, was fractured and contentious, and characterized by a level of genuine disagreement that the Council had not experienced in something close to a century. The Veth wanted to build a larger fleet and try again. The Krell, whose 3 interceptor commanders from New Carthage had returned with the unedited tactical record and given full testimony to a review board, were conducting an internal investigation that was making their military leadership very uncomfortable. The Solvari had 3 siege platform commanders who had chosen to stay with us rather than return, which was producing questions in their domestic politics that were not yet resolved. 2 of the Council's 12 member species had opened Commonwealth embassies. Quietly, without announcement, they had filed the paperwork with their own governments through the normal administrative channels, and the filings were public record, but had not been announced in any press release, which meant you had to be watching to notice. We were watching. We noticed. I did not contact them. I waited. The appropriate response to a quiet signal was to receive it quietly and let the people sending it set the pace. The Drenari had formally withdrawn from active council participation, remaining members in a technical sense but declining attendance at council sessions and redirecting their diplomatic resources toward Commonwealth affairs. This was not a dramatic act. There was no public statement. Evan had told me before it happened that the Drenari approach to these things was to simply be elsewhere, until elsewhere became the normal state of affairs. I thought that was very wise. On the 6-month anniversary of the signing, the Commonwealth held a joint session on Threshold. Not a formal ceremony, a working session, the first of what was intended to become a regular schedule. Representatives from 9 founding members and 4 observer species sat around a table that had been extended since the signing to accommodate the additional chairs, and they spent 8 hours working through practical matters. Economic exchange rates, defensive patrol coordination, scientific data sharing protocols, the question of what to do about a border dispute between 2 of the newer members that had predated anyone's involvement with the Commonwealth by several decades. I had expected the border dispute to be difficult. It turned out to be the most productive discussion of the day, because both species had been trying to resolve it through the Council's arbitration process for 12 years without result. And when the arbitration process was replaced by a room full of people who were invested in both parties being satisfied, the solution emerged in about 2 hours, and involved a shared access agreement that neither side had proposed before, because neither side had been asked what they actually needed, rather than what they were claiming. At the end of the session, I asked whether anyone wanted to add anything before we closed. Cell of the Drenari, who had been quiet for most of the day, raised their hand and said something that I have kept in my personal log since that evening. They said, "I want to say that I was frightened when we came to the first meeting. I had been frightened for a long time about things the Council might do, and now I am sitting in a room where 8 other civilizations are arguing about a border dispute and finding their way to an answer without anyone being told they do not qualify to have an opinion, and I want to say that this is what I was frightened we would never have." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Orsa said, in her direct way, "We have it now." And the session ended. I walked back to my office in the installation, which had been rebuilt into an actual office, rather than a converted storage module, though it still had the corner window, with the view of Threshold, if you stood at exactly the right angle. I stood at it for a while. Through the window, Threshold turned, green and wide-oceaned, and patient. The signal from the organisms on its surface was still transmitting. We had given it a dedicated monitoring station 6 months ago, which had identified 14 distinct signal patterns from 14 distinct source populations, each one communicating differently, but all of them reaching in the same direction. We still had not made direct contact. That decision had been made collectively, in consultation with the scientific teams from 3 different member species, and the consensus was that we would wait, not indefinitely, but until we were more certain of what they were reaching toward, and what they were ready to receive. Waiting was not the Council's style. The Council would have classified them and moved on. We had decided to listen. I thought that was the right decision. I thought it was also the hardest kind of right decision, which is the one that requires patience rather than action. I had not always been good at patience. I was getting better. On Earth, Cole was managing 17 active projects simultaneously and had started a system of morning briefings that had become, by general consensus, the most efficient 15 minutes of any given day. On Ganymede, Nathan was building ships faster than we could crew them, which was a problem we were solving by the simple method of asking who wanted to go to space, and being repeatedly surprised by how many people said yes. Yara's 3rd-generation equations were 3 months from a first test. We were building. We were always building. That was the point. I thought about my father's 7 words, which were carved into the hull of every Commonwealth vessel. "Then we will build something you cannot exile." He had said it in the moment of being exiled, which was, I had come to understand, exactly when you had to say it, because the moment before or after would have been too early, or too late. I thought about what we had built. 19 fold-capable vessels, 4 shipbuilding facilities, 9 founding members, and 4 observers, and 2 council species opening quiet embassies, a hall on a planet that had been empty space, a round table with chairs of 9 designs, A document with 19 signatures in 9 scripts. And a signal, still transmitting, from a surface below us, reaching outward towards something it could not yet see. "We hear you," I thought. Again, the same thing I had sent down to them on the first day. "We are here. We are building something worth reaching toward. When you are ready, we will be ready." I turned away from the window and went back to my desk. There was a lot to do. There was always a lot to do. I sat down and started on the next thing. The room was the same room. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked back into the Council of Nations Hall in Geneva, 10 years after the last time I had stood at that podium. The same podium, the same arrangement of seats, the same high ceiling, with the same pattern of light through the same panels. 40 years of diplomatic sessions had taken place in this room and left very little mark on it, which was either a testament to the room's resilience or an indication that the sessions themselves had not made much impression. The last time I had stood at that podium, I was 54 years old, and I had just been told that Earth's seat on the Galactic Council had been suspended indefinitely. I had said 7 words that I had not planned to say, and I had walked out through a room full of alien observers and come home on a shuttle, and started making a list in a notebook on the way back. Tonight I was 64 years old, and the room was full of faces that were not human. That was the second thing I noticed. Not because it was unusual. It had been several years since a room on Earth containing diplomatic representatives could be described as primarily human, but this room, in this building, on this particular night, had a specific quality to it. The Drenari delegation was here, Evan among them, the same compound eyes I had first noticed in the council chamber a decade ago, now aimed at me with something that I could only describe, after 10 years of knowing them, as warmth. The Kuuri delegation was here, Orsa in the front row with the specific posture she adopted when she was paying full attention, which was always. 7 other delegations sat in the expanded seating that Cole and his team had arranged in the past 3 days, each delegation in chairs built to their specifications, which was a detail that Lena Park had insisted on when the event was being planned, and which had generated an appreciable amount of quiet gratitude from people who were not accustomed to having their physical requirements considered in advance. At the back of the room, in 3 rows that had been added specifically for them, sat 4 Veth observers, not official council representatives. Observers, which was a distinction that mattered enormously in council diplomatic protocol, and somewhat less in ours, but which we had respected, because the 4 people sitting in those rows had taken a significant personal risk to be here, and that deserved acknowledgement. The youngest of the 4 was a Veth diplomat named Seas, who had been born the year before the council vote that exiled Earth, and who had therefore grown up in a galaxy that already had the Commonwealth in it. She had told me, when we first spoke 6 months ago, that she could not fully understand what the council she worked for had been like before, because before was something she knew only from records. She could only see what it was now, which was an institution under a great deal of internal pressure, from a galaxy that was rearranging itself around an alternative. I found her the most interesting person in the room to talk to. My daughter was standing beside me when I walked in. Saren at 39 had the same quality she had always had, which was the impression of someone who knows exactly where they are, and exactly why they are there, and is not bothered by anyone else's opinion of either. She had 3 ships under her command now, and a title that we had invented specifically for her, because nothing in existing military vocabulary adequately described the role of the person who had crossed the first line, and from that crossing had built a framework for how every subsequent crossing would go. She had wanted to call the title Navigator first, which was practical. I had suggested Admiral, which was traditional. We had compromised on something that contained both, and she had looked at the result with the expression she used when she was accepting something she was not entirely convinced by, but was willing to let stand. Nathan Graves was here too, in the back corner, holding a cup of coffee and looking at the room with the expression he used when he was making structural assessments. He had flown in from the Threshold facility 2 days ago specifically for this, which meant something because Nathan did not attend events unless he had decided they required his presence, and his assessments of what required his presence were unusually accurate. Owen Dale was at a table to one side. Cole Hartley was near the door. Patrick Dunn was, as far as I could tell, either absent or present, in the specific way that Patrick Dunn was present at things, which was to be there without appearing to be there, and to have arranged several things in the background that would only become visible in retrospect. Yara was not here. She was at the test facility in the outer system running the first full operational sequence of the third-generation drive, which she had judged more important than an anniversary ceremony. She was right. She sent a message that morning that said, "Results nominal. Will send full data by end of day. Wish I could be there. Do not let anyone make a speech longer than 15 minutes." I was going to try to keep mine under 10. The ceremony tonight was officially called the 10th anniversary session of the Terran Commonwealth Joint Council. Unofficially it was called the Reunion, which was Orsa's word for it, and which had stuck because it was more accurate. Reunion was the right word for a gathering of people who had found each other in the dark and built something together, and were meeting now to look at what they had built. I thought about the 10 years as I stood at the podium. The Fold Route network now covered 31 star systems. Not all of them were Commonwealth members. Some of them were independent systems that had chosen to connect to the network without formal membership, which was an option we had made available because controlling access to transit was the Council's approach, and we had decided we were not going to reproduce the things we disliked about the Council. 19 member civilizations, which was 19 more than there had been 10 years ago. 3 Council species had formally applied for observer status in the last 18 months. The applications were being processed, which in Commonwealth terms meant that member delegations were discussing them in working sessions, not that they were sitting in a filing office waiting for an administrator to get to them. 2 of the original 12 Council species had quietly ceased attending Council sessions and had not yet formally announced what they intended to do next. They were, in the diplomatic phrase, exploring options. We were aware of this and were not in a hurry about it, because being in a hurry about people exploring options was the kind of thing that made them stop exploring. The Council still existed. I had expected this. An institution 11,000 years old does not simply stop because an alternative becomes available. It adapts, or it resists, or it changes shape, but it does not disappear. The Council was doing all 3 of those things simultaneously, which was creating a significant amount of internal turbulence that was not yet resolved and might not be for decades. What had changed was the Council's position. It was no longer the only structure in the galaxy. It was no longer the necessary center around which every other species had to orient. There were 31 systems connected by fold routes that the Council did not control. There were 19 civilizations conducting trade and defense and scientific research through a framework the Council had not written. There were ships moving through space in ways that the Council's transit network did not track, and could not redirect, and was not charging fees for. The Council had called this destabilizing. We called it competition. I looked out at the room. All those faces. All those years. I thought about what to say and decided to say what was true, which had always worked better than what was planned. 10 years ago, I said, in this room, I was told that Earth did not belong to the galaxy's community of civilizations. I was told we were too aggressive, too expansionist, too unwilling to accept the necessary limits of membership in a managed galactic order. A pause. They were not entirely wrong. That got the reaction I expected, which was silence of the specific kind that means people are paying very close attention. We are aggressive, I said. We expand. We do not accept limits we have not chosen ourselves. These things are true. The Council identified them accurately. What they misunderstood was whether those qualities were problems or assets, whether they were things to be controlled or things to be pointed at the right problems. I looked around at the room. You are all here because your civilizations have versions of those same qualities. You expand. You reach. You push at edges. The Council classified some of you as unstable, some of you as pre-political, some of you as non-compliant. What you actually were was pointed at problems the Council had decided not to solve. I thought about the organisms on Threshold, still transmitting. The galaxy does not belong to the species that have been in it the longest. The galaxy does not belong to the species with the most history, or the most authority, or the most well-organized committee structure. The galaxy belongs to the species willing to go where they have not been before, to reach toward things they cannot yet see, to say yes to the people reaching back. I looked at Evan in the front row. 10 years ago, one person voted for us in a room that had decided against us. That vote cost them something. It was a real act, at real risk, in service of a belief that the galaxy should not be organized around exclusion. I looked at Orsa. 10 years ago, A civilization had been building ships in secret for 28 years because someone had told them they were not allowed to go to space. They went anyway. They came here anyway. They brought their engineering and their knowledge and their willingness to work alongside people they had never met, and what they built with us is better than anything either side would have built alone. I looked at the 4 Veth observers in the back. 10 years ago, the civilization that carried the most weight in the council that exiled us sent 4 of its younger diplomats to sit in this room tonight, not as representatives of that institution, but as individuals who have decided to see what we are building with their own eyes. I believe that required courage. I want to acknowledge that. Case, in the back row, did not move, but something in her posture changed, very slightly, in the way that people change when something lands accurately. What we have built is not finished, I said. It is not close to finished. We have 31 systems, and 19 members, and a fold route network that reaches further every year, and the 3rd generation drive that our propulsion team is testing today will extend our range by a factor of 12, and in 10 more years, the map will look different again. I thought about the signal my father had received before the first flight, the Drenari schematic that had made Yara go quiet for 11 seconds. We have friends who helped us when they had reasons not to. We have engineers who built things nobody told them were possible. We have navigators who crossed lines that someone else drew, and found that the space on the other side was available and interesting and worth the crossing. I thought about Barry Cole, falling asleep in his boots. About Lena Park and her calculations run 3 times before anything important happened. About Derek Vane in the dark at the tactical station the night before New Carthage. About 11 names on a wall. We have people who paid for this, I said quietly. People who went out and did not come back. I think about them. I think about them every day. I believe the way to honor that cost is not to slow down. It is to build faster, and better, and wider, and to make what they paid for matter, in every decision we make going forward. The room was very quiet. My daughter crossed the first line, I said. She crossed it in a ship with 43 people who had decided that a boundary drawn in space by someone else was not a sufficient reason to stay on the approved side of it. She found a planet, and she found a species reaching outward, and she found a friend who needed help, and she helped them without asking permission, because that is how humans do things when we are being ourselves. I looked at Saren. She looked back at me with the expression she had worn since she was 7 years old when she was doing something she had been planning for a long time. The galaxy spent 11,000 years deciding who was allowed where, I said. We are building something that asks a different question. Not who is allowed, but who wants to go. I stopped talking. The room was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Orsa started clapping, not politely, the way the Kuuri clapped, which involved all 4 of their hands, and which produced a substantial amount of sound. It spread, not slowly, fast, the way things spread in rooms where people have been waiting for permission to respond, and suddenly have it. I stepped back from the podium. Saren was beside me, and she said, very quietly, so only I could hear, under 10 minutes. Barely, I said. Yara would approve. We stood together for a moment, while the room kept applauding. I looked at the faces. All those species, all those histories, all those long roads to a single room on Earth, where they were clapping, because they were part of something, and they knew it, and they were glad. I thought about a shuttle coming home from Arcturus Station 10 years ago. A notebook and a list. 7 words said into a microphone in a room that was about to forget them, except that they had not been forgotten. Then we will build something you cannot exile. We had. The reception afterward lasted 4 hours. I spent most of it in conversation with people I did not get to see often enough, which was the case with everyone I cared about, because the distances involved in a 31-system commonwealth were not trivial. Evan and I sat in a corner for an hour, and talked about nothing particularly significant, which was, after 10 years of knowing each other through urgent circumstances, a genuine luxury. Orsa found me near the end of the evening, and told me that the Kuuri engineering team had completed a design proposal for the next generation of Commonwealth shipbuilding facilities, and that Nathan Graves had already seen it, and had said, in his quiet voice, that it was going to change things. The 4 Veth observers left before the end of the evening. Cee stopped beside me on her way out. She was taller than me, as all Veth were, and she looked at me for a moment with those pale, unblinking eyes, and then she said, "What you described tonight. The question you said you were asking. Who wants to go?" "Yes," I said. She said, "My people have wanted to go further than the council allowed for a very long time. We were told it was not necessary." I said, "It is always necessary." She held my gaze for another moment. Then she said, "I will see you at the next session," which, in Veth diplomatic language, as I had learned over many years, was a statement of future intent. I said, "I look forward to it." She left with the other 3 observers, and I watched them go and thought about 11,000 years of a civilization that had held the center of galactic authority, and what it might mean for the people inside it to look at something new being built, and feel, not threatened, but curious. Curious was enough. You could build a great deal from curious. Cole found me at 11 in the evening with his jacket over his arm, and the look of someone who has been managing the logistics of a large event and is ready to stop managing them. "Everything is in order," he said. "It was a good evening," I said. "Yes," he said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yara's results came in." I looked at him. "And?" "The 3rd generation drive is operational," he said. "Full range confirmed. 400 light-years per fold." I sat with that for a moment. 400 light-years. The Council's fastest enforcement ship covered 400 light-years in about 14 months. Yara's drive covered it in 40 seconds. "Where does that put the outer edge of what we can reach?" I asked. "In practical terms?" Cole thought about it. "The galactic center. The galactic center. Where the density of stars was so great that the light from them never fully disappeared. Where civilizations that no one in the outer regions had ever made contact with had been living for a period of time that made the Council's 11,000 years look like a short weekend. Yara is already planning the first exploratory fold to test the range," Cole said. "She is asking for Saren to pilot." Of course she was. "Does Saren know?" "She does," Cole said. "She said yes," before Yara finished the sentence. I thought about a signal, still transmitting from a green planet, reaching outward towards something it could not yet see. I thought about what we had sent back. "We hear you." I thought about what it would mean to reach toward the center of the galaxy and send the same message in every direction. "We hear you. We are here. We built something. It is for everyone." I walked outside into the Geneva night. The sky was clear, and the stars were very bright, and they covered everything in every direction, more of them than any single person could ever count. I had been looking at these stars since I was a child in Cardiff, with my father's hand on my shoulder pointing at specific lights and telling me their names. I had been looking at them from the surface of this planet, and from the window of shuttles and from the forward panels of ships, and they were always the same stars, and they were always different, because the thing you knew about stars changed what you saw when you looked at them. What I knew about stars now, some of them had civilizations underneath them that the Council had decided did not qualify for contact. Some of them had species reaching outward in the only way they knew. Some of them had worlds that had been told to stay in their place, and had been doing so for decades or centuries, while waiting for something to change. What I knew about us, we were going to reach everyone we could, not to tell them what to do, not to bring them into a structure they had not chosen, to say, "There is something being built. If you want to be part of it, here is the door. It does not have a cost. It does not have conditions. It has a round table and chairs of every design, and a lot of work, and the specific kind of company that comes from being around people who have decided to reach for something larger than what they were told to expect." The stars were patient. They had been there before us, and they would be there after us, and that was not frightening. It was clarifying. We had 10 more years in front of us before the next anniversary, and in that time, Yara's 3rd generation drive would take us to places we had never seen, and new civilizations would find their way to the table we had built, and some of them would surprise us, and some of us would surprise them, and we would build faster than anyone expected, and make mistakes we would fix honestly, and carry the names of everyone who paid for it on the hull of every ship we flew. I had said we were not finished. I meant it in the most complete way possible. Not finished by a very long reach. But look what we had started with. 7 words in a chamber on a station 40 light-years away, a note in a personal log, a list on a shuttle, An engineer who was right for 9 years before anyone was ready to listen. A ship with 43 people who crossed a line because someone they trusted asked them to. That was enough. That had always been enough. I looked at the stars for a long time, and then I went inside. There was a lot to do. There was always a lot to do. And I would not have had it any other way.